Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 26, Crisis in the Arrowverse, Part 2. Welcome to the show. My name is Adam Murdo.
I'm Peter Rios.
And we welcome you back here to the second and final part of our examination of the CW Network's television crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths between all five that, at the time, DC Comics-based primetime dramas. Collectively known as the Arrowverse, based on the originating show of that little cluster of programs, Arrow. Mm-hmm. Yep, we've got parts 4 and 5 of that crossover to talk about here, plus some special additional material that is also of interest, I think.
Before we jump in, and listeners, you can go back to the beginning of Crisis Tapes 25 if you need any kind of preamble breakdown. We went through quite a lengthy journey to get us to this crossover. But if you listen to that episode, great. But what I do want to just quickly talk about here, and pre-show, I laid this on Adam, at San Diego Comic-Con this summer. There wasn't a lot of TV, movie, media buzz because, of course, the strikes were going on.
Very true.
One of the things that did slip under the radar is that they are going to do 2 animated features, one being Watchmen, which I didn't tell you beforehand, and the other called Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths.
No, they had to put had to brand it with a established property and a colon. It couldn't just be. They could have called it DC Universe : Crisis on Infinite Earths, for that matter. That was originally what it was going to be called in the couple. Was one of the working titles for it was like DC Universe : Crisis on Infinite Earths, or like History of the DC Universe. But yeah, that's a little disappointing. They felt they needed to brand it that way, but. Yeah, sure. I don't know how I managed to go this long without hearing about this, but yeah, bring it on.
Yep. The idea, at least in pre-length of this of all these strikes, is that it was to be released possibly in 2024. None of that is concrete. They may have already been working on it. I don't know. I don't know any information. I didn't bother to look up anything else other than the announcement, because this far out, it really doesn't make any point in, just dealing in rumors and things like that. Speculation is fine. But so Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths, I'm hoping it's not just one, 90-minute movie, That's
exactly what I was just thinking, Peter, because that's not nearly enough. It's going to, if it's just that running time, it can't help but disappoint us.
Yeah. I mean, we got 5 hours out of the CW version, And even they barely managed to do, they came pretty close at hitting some major beats as we've been discussing, and as we will discuss. And then the question then is, as you mentioned, as you sort of talk, had your reaction about the Justice League preface, we are currently in what's called the Tomorrowverse when it comes to the animated movies. It's all the movies after what they did for Flashpoint, and they are all connected. So the question then is this Crisis on Infinite Earths an adaptation of the original comics, or like the CW version, will they just do the animated version?
Like a crisis of that multiverse as opposed to adapting the crisis of the comics multiverse. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a fair question.
Yeah. So interesting. Again, I have no other news. If there was news dropped, I don't think there was, but 2024 seems a little early, but who knows? Maybe it won't be till 2025. I hope they do it.
Hope they just make the movie, or hope they get it out by next year.
No, I hope they I don't care when it comes out, but I don't mean that in the sense that I think it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait. No. Okay, let's just this crisis concept that our entire podcast is about has become a thing unto itself, like what Grant Morrison often said about the DC universe or comic book universes. It has grown and it has spawned, and we are in a complete multiverse thing right now when it comes to all geek related stuff. Like, the new My Adventures of Superman had multiple versions of characters, without going into details.
Just because I haven't watched past episode 3.
Okay. Certainly the Spider-Verse animated movies.
Oh, yeah.
What's going on in the MC universe. Even in the Superman and Lois, and then beyond just Marvel and DC, I know that there's been other properties that have done the same. Like multiverse is the thing now, but really it was just a DC thing, and for a lot of DC's usage of it, it was a very specific crisis thing, whatever that meant. Crisis on Infinite Earths, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis. The multiverse seemed to resonate with that word. So yeah, let's do an animated version. Let's see what happens. And then you and I, in another year or 2 or 3, we'll be doing another episode like this about that.
Yes, and I hope we're at least as satisfied with that attempt, if it does come to fruition, as we were with this one from the CW TV family of shows.
So there you go, listeners. We'll keep you up to date on that. Okay, so this formula is easy, just like we did with chapters 1, 2, and 3. Adam is going to do a breakdown of each episode, usually in acts form, like a chunk leading us to a commercial break, and then we'll discuss it, and then another chunk. And we only have to do 2 chapters this time around, so let's see where this takes us.
With some back matter afterwards, so stay tuned after the program for it's our version of the Kevin Smith post-crisis show. Okay, so yes, we're looking at episodes 4 and 5 of this Crisis TV crossover, and they were aired on Tuesday, January 14th, 2020, which was a little over a month after the airing of episode 3, which was December 10th of 2019. And they were aired back-to-back, parts 4 and 5. And episode 4 was technically an episode of the Arrow series. And it was Arrow Season 8, Episode 8. And the script for that was written by Mark Guggenheim himself, with an important assist from somebody named Marv Wolfman, who knows a thing or two about crisis stories, we must agree. All right, the action opens, as a caption on screen tells us, on the planet Maltus, 10,000 years ago, which doesn't seem to be nearly long enough. And we are greeted by a man named Mar-Novu, who, as we know, will eventually come to be known as the Monitor. This is pre-mutton chops, though. He still has those weird alien cornrows on his head, but he and his lab partner and wife, named Xeneen, Xneen, I had to look that up someplace. Her name is Xeneen, are preparing to send Mar-Novu on a groundbreaking expedition through time back to the dawn of time. And longtime comics fans know that never ends well. So he puts on his iconic Monitor armor and makes fun of it as he prepares to go through a quantum portal back to the dawn of time. But instead of going where he was planning to go, he's instead shunted, as if rejected by reality itself, back to the dawn of time of the antimatter universe. And there he comes face to face with his antimatter doppelganger for the first time. The Anti-Monitor just pops into malevolent being right there. And the horrified Mar-Novu whispers through his comlink that his towering ambition has doomed us all. And there's our ominous prologue. Then we go back to where we left off at the end of episode 3, with the last 7 remaining positive matter beings in existence, who managed to escape the total annihilation of the positive matter multiverse that was by blipping out to Vanishing Point, a place that is not a place outside of the official time stream, where time and space do not officially apply, but time still, despite the fact that it's not supposed to flow in Vanishing Point, it's passing very slowly for our heroes because they know they're trapped in this place that is not a place. They're helpless. Everything they've ever known and loved has been utterly destroyed as if it never existed, and they don't know where to go or what to do. And we're introduced to this scene of despair by the voiceover of Ryan Choi, the paragon of humanity, who gives us an expositional update in the form of a letter he's writing to his now non-existent wife back home on the now non-existent Earth 1. And he's despondently detailing to his non-existent wife about how each paragon is failing to be useful in getting them out of this predicament, including himself, and just kind of detailing the different ways they're all dealing with their grief and despair. He is trying to be productive by helping Lex Luthor to cobble together cannibalized Time Master technology, because Vanishing Point, of course, in the comics and in the Arrowverse, was a headquarters for a group called, Vanishing Point was the Linear Men in the comics. But at some point in the comics, I think the line kind of blurred between Time Masters and Linear Men. I think we're supposed to understand that the Linear Men eventually evolved from Rip Hunter's original group of time explorers. But anyway, they're using Time Masters technology to try to build a teleporter, but they can't get it to work. Barry, meanwhile, he's just been missing for a while, and eventually we discover that it's because he tried to get into the Speed Force to get out of Vanishing Point that way, and all he succeeded in doing was blipping himself several weeks ahead in time. Not that time is supposed to exist in Vanishing Point, but whatever. And he pops back in, and everyone wonders where he's been, and he says, What? I just left here seconds ago. I tried to go through the Speed Force, it didn't work. And he just kind of looks at them and says, there's no way out of here. And so they're just kind of slowly succumbing to despair. But there is a glimmer of hope in another place that is beyond space and time, i.e. the realm of Purgatory, which, again, looks equally like the forests of British Columbia and that island where poor Ollie in the Arrow TV show had his origin. And it makes sense that Ollie's psyche would construct Purgatory to look like this place. We went over that in our last episode. But Ollie, or the ghost of Ollie, is there, and he's undergoing Zen Spectre training with the ghost of Jim Corrigan, who, of course, knows a thing or two about wielding the power of the Spectre. And so he's training Ollie's mind to bear that power, and that takes the form of a black and white montage of Ollie's greatest, most brutal fight scenes from the past 8 seasons of Arrow. And the objective here is, of course, strengthening Ollie to wield the Spectre's power to battle with the Anti-Monitor. He's also upped his green hood game a little bit, because now he's wearing like the more full-length cloak of the Spectre. It looks a little bit more like a duster on Ollie, but it's recognizably the Spectre outfit. Finally, when he and Corrigan agree that he's ready to try to take action, he pops into Vanishing Point and tells Barry that he needs to keep on working the Speed Force angle, and to help him do that, he unlocks Barry's full potential as a speedster by just kind of tapping him on the forehead. Just nice, cheap lack of special effect there. Poof, Barry now has the ability, apparently, to go through the Speed Force and get them all out of there, though where and when to is a question that stands out in my mind. And suddenly Barry is able to zip everybody out of the Vanishing Point on a 2-pronged mission. Let me know when we get to the commercial break here, Peter.
Well, that's good. That we can... Ollie coming to the Vanishing Point and telling Barry that Speed Force is the key is the end of part 1. So we can,
okay, good.
Let's take a pause there then.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot, right? In this
this is a little less decompressed than some. Actually, most of the crossover is good that way, I think. Really, a Crisis story has no excuse to have filler in it. And the first act of this episode, at least, is pretty packed. It can't say the same for some other parts of this episode and the next one, but off to a strong start.
And I also thought coming back after a month, not that I could second guess what they were going to do. We've been talking in the previous episode how they've been hitting big beats, how certain episodes could relate to certain issues of the Crisis. Certainly getting the origin story of the Monitor feels like this is a little bit dipping into Crisis number 7, where we did get the origin story of a lot of different things, not only Monitor, but Pariah, the DC Universe, etc. But it was very interesting. I felt that Wolfman, Guggenheim, whoever's decision this was that they decided to merge Monitor's story with Pariah's origin story from the comics.
And Krona as well.
And sure, yes, absolutely. And so you have that aspect, and we talked a little bit about it last episode, and we'll talk about it more this episode, but just this notion of Ollie as the Spectre, who was a brief major player of the Crisis, sure.
Absolutely. Just like the cover of number 10.
Yep. So again, not unheard of. But then it makes me feel like, okay, now we're also bringing in a little bit of Final Night and Hal as Spectre in the comics, and now it's Ollie as the Spectre, and what does that mean, and what will that mean in later chapters as we keep going. So those are some of my bigger thoughts about the entire episode, or this chapter, I should say, and we'll. I have smaller ones, obviously. Monitor says to his wife when they're talking about this quantum flux thing, "I'm just the time traveler here, my love. You are the Monitor."
Yeah.
When he talks about that his suit shields him from the coronal radiation, I said, "Oh, well, then where does he get the cape from? Why did he decide later on that he's like, I need a cape?"
Dramatic effect, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. And it looks good.
Personally, I kind of hate that I still think of him as a primal entity that rose into being along with all of positive matter existence. He didn't live on Maltas, and he sure as hell didn't have a wife.
Right.
I understand reasoning behind this Zanine character existing. I mean, he needs to talk to somebody as he's preparing to make this momentous journey back to the dawn of time. And I guess he could be talking to like an AI virtual lab assistant, but I guess the showrunners thought maybe having a wife would A, humanize him a little further. Not that I think this character really needs to be humanized, and B, further representation for women, another female character to slip in there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I am not a fan of the Monitor having a wife.
And like you said, the merging of Krona's backstory, of Pariah's backstory. I mean, Krona's story is the birth of the DC multiverse, to a large degree. So how do you so you have to explain that, I guess, or they have to explain that there is an antimatter universe and who got there. It wasn't just Nash. He just freed the antimatter Monitor, but how did he already come to be? That's where Pariah's story comes in to some degree, the origin story from the comics. I was also just a little confused. So he goes into a zone, which I feel, it's certainly designed to look like the zone that the Legends always go into when they're traveling through time.
Okay.
So as you mentioned, he goes back into the dawn of time, but into the antimatter universe, not in our universe, right? So,
and guess what? There were trees at the dawn of time in the antimatter. There were anti-trees.
So it's just, I was just a little confused. They don't really go into it. Ultimately, it probably doesn't mean anything. He breaches the dawn of time. He goes into the antimatter universe. Does that mean he created? Was it always there? Was the Anti-Monitor doing the same thing, trying to also, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many questions that the comics do well in showing that they are parallels, that they are quote unquote brothers, that they are, whatever. They both were doing these things simultaneously, right?
Yeah. Here, it's almost like he's some kind of demonic, unpersonified, formless evil that was just waiting for someone to show up, and then that this evil could assume its form, its agency, and it would be powerless to act until some poor fool found his way back to the beginning of time and set it loose and gave it the ability to act.
Right, which is what Pariah's origin is, right? He's the, even though he was manipulated by the Anti-Monitor, it was because of his mucking around with the origins of the universe. That's what unleashed the antimatter cloud in the first place. And, so.
Yes, he freed the Anti-Monitor from whatever catatonic state he'd been in.
Yeah. So I thought it was, as I was watching it, my head was sort of spinning. I was like, wow, it's everything. But it also felt like that wasn't the point. The point was, were they trying to humanize the Monitor, who is dead by now, right? In the CW universe, he's...
Yeah. And I think in episode 5, he's not even mentioned.
Oh, wow. So it was... I understand their reasonings behind it. It's never going to go as deep as we would want it to, like the comics, because it's the TV show. What are they going to do? Try to teach comic book physics to general audiences the way the comics did? Probably not. But it at least acted as a nice prologue of sorts, just as the very first chapter that gave us the big sort of, here's what the multiverse is. And now it's like, oh, by the way, that guy that died, here's what happened. This is the whole reason this event exists. Mm-hmm. So, and
it's all kind of his fault, and so he's a potential key to undoing it all.
Yeah, I did wish we would have seen the great DC cosmic hand. That would have been awesome.
It surely would have been.
In part 1, there wasn't much that I noted outside of the whole, Ollie as a Spectre, which we'll keep talking about. This is, as you mentioned, this is all for Ollie to battle the Anti-Monitor, a being who stands against all that ever was or will be, Apocalypse itself, given life and form. There you go. That's what you sort of suggested earlier.
Yep. Given Mar-Novu's life and form.
Mm-hmm. Again, we can't question, we can't think about it too hard. Why does Vanishing Point exist? Why does Purgatory still exist if technically hundreds and thousands of universes are dead, Okay, so Vanishing Point exists.
Well, Purgatory being a place of the spirit, it arguably transcends time and space, so I can see how it still exists, and probably the souls of the dead would still exist there as well. And if anything, it'd be overcrowded by now with all the untold sextillions of intelligent beings from all those vanished universes. But Ollie still gets his own private little Purgatory spa cell there where he can sit there and train with Corrigan.
Right. That's the end of my notes for that chapter.
See where we can go here. Okay, so Ollie then, we ended with him showing up in Vanishing Point and encouraging Barry to keep trying to penetrate the Speed Force to get everyone out of Vanishing Point and maybe take some positive action, and he even suggests to them what they're best advised to do. He tells them that there's still hope to take the fight to the Anti-Monitor, and also to maybe potentially prevent the Anti-Monitor from being created in the first place. So, what we're getting here is kind of what happened in the 10th issue of the Crisis maxi series back in the good old days, where we split up. The villain army in that story traveled back to Oa back in the before times to try and stop Krona from doing his great experiment in the first place, while everybody else was going to travel back to the dawn of time to maybe battle the Anti-Monitor there. So the same thing happens here, where our surviving heroes, the Paragons, split up into teams. Kara Zor-El, Supergirl, Ryan Choi, and Lex Luthor, so that Kara and Ryan can keep an eye on him, are tasked with traveling 10,000 years ago back to Maltus. And I find myself questioning whether they should be able to do that, since I think the destruction of the multiverse was retroactive, and if they can travel back in time to places, couldn't they just travel back in time to various parallel universes and get all the Supermen and whatever and build an army that way? But apparently not. So those three are dispatched to do that. And meanwhile, the other team will consist of the Flash, Barry, Ollie himself, Sarah Lance, the White Canary, Kate Kane, Batwoman, and John Jones. They're going to go to the dawn of time, but on their way there, Anti-Monitor jump scare gets them in this as they're traveling through the Speed Force, and they get scattered throughout the Speed Force, wherein are apparently trapped little fragments of space-time that were cast out of being when the different universes ceased to exist. So they're basically trapped in little pockets of personal past representing great victories or the forging of friendships or whatever. It's the Avengers Endgame of it all, We'll come back to that, I guess. And I'm not sure from my notes how much we kind of cut back and forth between Barry visiting these different little pocket prisons of his friends in the Speed Force and what's happening on planet Maltus. But you mentioned that Barry does, while he's going around trying to snap his friends out of these little bits of reality in which they're currently confined, he does eventually meet another. We get a Flash of Two Worlds moment, which was a cool surprise, I think, for all the fans watching. He encounters the Ezra Miller version of the Flash, as seen in the Justice League movie, and I guess he was also in the Batman v Superman movie. Am I remembering that right? Briefly, yes. Yep, just like a little. He seemed to be popping out of a crisis event in that too, and so there's just a quick, funny little moment of Grant Gustin and Ezra Miller, two Flashes, two Barry Allens, meeting each other, and Barry remarks that this should be impossible now because nothing else is supposed to exist. No one else is supposed to exist. So at least it was good of the writers to acknowledge that, even as they're allowing this to happen. And after that little meeting, I guess we check back in with the away team of Kara, Ryan, and Luthor, who are on the planet Maltus 10,000 years ago, which looks a heck of a lot like the forests of British Columbia. Ryan Choi even mentions it. Shouldn't this alien world look a little bit more alien? And Kara immediately snaps at him. Try to focus here. I'm like, pay no attention to those trees behind the curtain. And so they just head for the nearest city they see, which is at least alien and futuristic looking. You can believe that this is another planet that far anyway. And Luthor, of course, gets away from them almost immediately. They catch up with him again almost immediately. But then he double crosses them because somewhere along the line, when he was rewriting the Book of Destiny to, pop himself in as a Paragon in the place of the Brandon Routh Superman, he also gave himself laser hands, and he uses them to zap both Kara and Ryan unconscious, and he starts on his way again, whistling a merry tune. You take the high road, I'll take the low road, and I'll get to Mar Novu before ye. And that's what he's planning to do, to get to Mar Novu and strike his own bargain with him for his own advantage before Supergirl and Ryan Choi can catch up with him. And I guess that's where we go to commercial at the end of Act 2 of this episode. Right.
Love that you mentioned that this is, the issue cover. It's the issue to Crisis issue 10. It's the cover. It's the swirling, white background going back in time. And
everything but the giant hand.
Yeah. This chapter starts with Ollie because this is an Arrow episode, and he often narrates the beginning of every episode. I'm Oliver Queen. I was stranded. I blah, 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 blah. I have to save the city, yada, yada, yada. I had to become something else, whatever, blah, whatever that mantra was, whatever that was. Mm-hmm. And then this one is a little different. I am Oliver Queen, but I am also something more, a ghost, a specter, that's in tune with the entire multiverse, blah, 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 blah. I started to write here. I don't know, I mentioned last episode how, and they even talk about this in the introduction in the comics that we read for this episode for later, where the Arrowverse was meant to be grounded, almost like when Smallville, when they said no
Tights,
no capes, no tapes, no flights, right? Arrowverse is sort of the same thing, like it's all to be grounded, no magic, no this, no that. Well, that eventually went away.
Yep, that got away from them in a big way.
So it's interesting to me that I know I'm going back to this again, that they chose to do Ollie as the Spectre, because it feels like it, I mentioned this last episode where the Arrow TV show was very much that grounded nature. Then they started to bring in superheroes, but then this final season was very cosmic. They're going to other universes. They're dealing in purgatory. They're dealing with the Spectre. And now he becomes the Spectre. And Stephen Amell playing cosmic, playing the Spectre, I don't know if it worked for me. I understand the choices behind it. I sort of suffer through it a little, but it feels, I don't know. I guess it's because he is the personification of the Arrowverse. That's why they decided to do it. Would it have worked if they had just used, what if they just used Corrigan in that? Would it have worked? It probably would have worked, but maybe not emotionally. Because in this,
it wouldn't have had anywhere near the same impact.
Right. Because we get, a couple scenes here. I talked last episode how all the crossovers tend to boil down to what is Barry and Ollie's relationship at that point in whatever crossover they're dealing with. And this is the same thing here. Do you trust me? Are you Oliver Queen? And then he says, now run, Barry, run. Like those emotional beats, those things that have echoed between the two of them for so long, obviously wouldn't have worked if it was Corrigan as Spectre. But it's just interesting. I find Stephen Amell as a Spectre. He's not the strongest actor, but I understand their choices. So let me just get that out of the way, I guess. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I agree that it feels a little odd seeing Ollie in that role. But yeah, like you, I understand as the personification of the Arrowverse. You put it very well there, Peter. That's why he needed to be in it. This whole thing is kind of like a big farewell to the actor and the character that started this whole little pocket of DC media. And so him as the Spectre makes sense in that regard.
Right.
A question, though. Do you know if did Corrigan as Spectre appear on the Arrow show before? Is this something that Arrow viewers had seen before?
The only Corrigan that I remember is the one from the Constantine show, where there was a cop named Corrigan. We never saw him as the Spectre. We only saw, and my memory's not 100% on this. I don't know if he was killed and then becomes the Spectre, but I do remember a shot of him. Maybe it was him coming back to life, where he was human, and then there was just a swirl of green hooded energy around him, and you're like, oh, okay, obviously he's going to become the Spectre. But then that series was short-lived. Now, and as I mentioned last time, as I think that actor is not the same actor of the Corrigan that we saw in the Crisis. It's a totally different actor. Sure. Yeah. So I don't believe we've ever seen a Corrigan. I can I'll do a quick search, but I don't think we did. Or maybe if we did see him, was he just kind of was he a name only? But the only ones I see here are Jim Corrigan from Purgatory, who's the actor in Crisis, and Jim Corrigan from the Constantine show. So,
okay, well, it would have It would have been nice if they'd managed to slip that into an earlier part of the season, perhaps.
Yeah.
Instead of just having some random bearded guy step out of the bushes in Purgatory and said, "Hey, I'm Jim Corrigan. You're going to be the Spectre now."
And then I have to talk about the Ezra Miller cameo, the Barry Allen from the Movieverse, because that really was a complete surprise, as you mentioned. So many of those earlier cameos were, we already knew. If you followed like previews and articles, it was like, oh, okay, we're going to get this, we're going to get this. Not all of them, but some of them. This one was, I just was thrilled to see this. As goofy as it was, there's not a lot to it in terms of stage direction. It's just 3 camera shots usually, and
get the impression a little of the dialogue might even have been improvised.
Maybe. But hard to ignore, I know that there was often not strife between the TV and the Movieverse, but there was very little sharing going on. So for them to allow them to do that, it's really just them throwing them a bone. But fantastic, just great. That's what we wanted.
Very fun. Felt like a little bit of a passing of the torch, but as things have not gone all that well with Ezra Miller in the DC extended universe or whatever they're going to call it now, maybe right. The torch will be passed right back, or passed to another runner.
The baton.
Oh, yep, excellent.
And that's it. That's kind of all I have for that section. Do you want to take us up to? Let's see. I'm not quite sure where to stop. So wherever you feel like you want to stop, because these next sort of blocks kind of blend into each other. So
okay,
yeah,
I think we'll take it back to the final battle then.
Okay,
because I don't have very detailed notes about what follows here.
Right.
It's just this Barry zipping around to find Batwoman, and who is witness to like some confrontation between Ollie and somebody else, and which seems like an odd place for her to be. And
yeah,
just all of the he has to find Sarah, and he has to find Kate Kane. I keep wanting to call her Kate Spencer. wrong vigilante, and John Jones, and he has to just kind of snap them out. And at one point he jumps into the previous year's Elseworlds crossover, and he gets Ollie himself out of there. And they have their little heart-to-heart. And I think that's where Barry comes to the realization that Ollie made his little deal with the Monitor to take the place of Kara and Barry. Of course, as Flash and Supergirl are supposed to die in Crisis. That has been the script ever since 1985. But and instead, Ollie inserted himself, and kind of penciled himself into the Book of Destiny there, much as Luthor later did. And so Barry succeeds in doing that, and he gathers all his friends again. But meanwhile, on the planet Maltus, 10,000 years earlier, Lex finds his way into Mar-Novu's laboratory. We get a little replay of the dialogue that Mar-Novu was speaking in the opening scene of the episode, except this time Lex barges in and manages to talk Mar-Novu into a tentative alliance, the brave and the bald, as Lex calls it. He volunteers to help him avoid making the terrible mistake he was going to make, and instead make a different mistake that will be profitable to Lex. But Kara and Ryan find the lab and bursts in and nips Lex's scheme right in the bud. She and Lex with his laser hands have a battle there in the quantum portal chamber. Meanwhile, the Monitor's wife Zneen is unconscious up above, and the Monitor goes to her, and he and Ryan Choi have a little heart-to-heart. And as the paragon of humanity, he's able to talk Mar-Novu down from the ledge and just convinces him, this is not worth it. And Mar-Novu basically agrees that he's not going to go back in time. And it reminds me of a scene from Disney's Meet the Robinsons, where the main character just looks at this horrible machine that he is destined to create in the future and just stares at it and says, "I will never invent you," and it disappears. That's kind of what Ryan Choi manages to work out here with Mar-Novu. And then Barry appears, and he's able to whisk Kara and Ryan, and Lex too, I guess, away to the site of their big battleground at the dawn of time in the antimatter universe, which is about the only place they can access. Supposedly, somehow they got to Malthus 10,000 years ago. Again, that's kind of a hole in this whole thing, but it's determined that this is their best chance at preventing everything that's happened from happening by going back to the dawn of time and battling the Anti-Monitor there.
Right.
Although, they kind of expect that having talked Mar-Novu into not going back in time, the Anti-Monitor should therefore not exist. But when they get to the dawn of time in the antimatter universe, the Anti-Monitor is waiting with a smug, implausible spiel about how he can still exist despite Novu's not being dissuaded. I think he says something to the effect of, "There will always be other versions of Mar-Novu in other universes that might have come back anyway. I am an inevitability." Yeah. Don't know if I buy it. But there they are. They're there. The Anti-Monitor's there. Oh, and there's shadow demons there too. And a big fight scene ensues with everybody having something to do. And Alia's Spectre hits the scene as well.
Right.
Okay. Does that seem like a break?
That's a good break, because then there's only, like you mentioned, there's only the big fight scene at the end. Yeah, I guess, I'm trying to wrap my head around, that they get to go back to Malthus. They get to go back into time, because what this version of Crisis, what they don't do in the TV version that they do in the comic version, the CW doesn't actually save any universe. They all disappear, correct?
Yep, there's supposedly nothing left in positive matter except that little speck in Vanishing Point.
Right. Whereas in the Crisis, as we know, they managed to save 5 distinct alternate universes. So you can say that that's the reason why they can go back in time to Malthus, and why they can go back, because, it's almost like the CW is suggesting that time is also separate from the universes, whereas I guess in the comics, because we have a physical universe, that's why we have time. But is the CW saying, well, time is just time? That's why we have the Vanishing Point, because it exists outside of time. So, it's again, trying to wrap my head around, like we do in the Crisis tapes, like we do with the comics, we play a little bit of, comic book physics a lot, yeah. Why? Now you could make the argument that because the Monitor then decides not to go back, does that mean that does that mean that he doesn't affect anything?
It doesn't seem to make a difference, because the main reason they would have wanted him not to go back to the dawn of time is because then the Anti-Monitor, in theory, wouldn't have existed. But somehow we're told that he still does. Nanny poo poo.
Yeah.
So the whole side quest to Malthus just seems to have been in vain. And I mentioned earlier how a lot of these episodes did a good job of not being decompressed. Well, this is one way where this episode did not succeed, because the whole thing with Barry having to go and gather his friends from this clip reel of stuff that had happened in their past, it's based, like I said, it's like an Avengers Endgame time trip greatest hits package, basically, just to pad out the running time here. And ultimately, interesting as it is, the side trip to Malthus amounts to little more than that, just something to pad the runtime, because apparently it had no impact on the hero's objective. It didn't prevent the Anti-Monitor from being created. It didn't prevent retroactively the destruction of the multiverse. They still have to go back to the dawn of time and fight the big bad, who still exists despite all that they tried to do to prevent him from existing.
Right. And that is the same as the comics. The Anti-Monitor managed to find his way back to the dawn of time as well. He surprised him there, right? Like he was like, aha, I'm here. I've been here. That's where he was cooling his bits, right? After Supergirl whooped his butt, I think, he decided to hide out there. So, and, given what's going to happen in the final chapter in this episode, even if stopping Marv from doing the experiment meant that it halted everything, it doesn't matter anyway, because as you say, we're going to get a major cosmic event anyway soon. So it ultimately doesn't matter. To the aspect of Flash running around to the various points, I wonder if that's Wolfman's inspiration because of how he treated and how he wrote Barry in the Crisis novel as opposed to the comic.
That's very good notion there, Peter, because he does, in that little essay from Wolfman that you sent me, along with other materials we'll talk about later, he does go out of his way to mention the Flash novelization, of the Crisis novelization he wrote, which expanded Barry's role and from Barry's POV in that story.
Yeah. And also not terribly unlike when in the Crisis, when Barry was in the future and he noticed that the antimatter wall was coming, he changes his vibration and he starts popping up into various points within the Crisis. He shows up in issue 3 in New York. He shows up in issue 2 and, in front of Batman. So not there's precedence there, I guess. The CW has to have their drama, they have to have their characterizations. And there are some things about those random moments that I feel like, if you think of it as this is the Arrow episode, and it could be that it's their way of let's go back to different parts of, here's where Ray Palmer got introduced to the Arrowverse, and here was Ollie's reaction during Invasion. So I think it just kind of falls a little flat because that's not what I wanted now, like I think, I want more. I want something different, here, but okay. Like I wrote here, when they do go to the scene with Ollie and Supergirl in Invasion, John is there, John Joe Martian Manhunter, but he actually wasn't part of the Invasion crossover. So that's it, maybe inserting him to show what he was doing, possibly. In the Elseworlds aspect, as you mentioned, when Barry goes there and he sees Oliver shoot that arrow, Barry wasn't there at that point. So is the arrow being a gift from the Monitor? Was it cleaning up any bit of missing info from that sequence earlier? I don't know. These were all questions that I was just kind of spitting out. Pieces I wrote here, pieces of Oliver and all of these different memories. That arrow from the Monitor made Barry wonder. Ollie tells Barry the deal that he made during Elseworlds. The real heroes are the ones that have to keep going. So, was that it? Did they have to explore this confusion that Barry has because of what Ollie is going through,
And his sense of survivor's guilt because he knows that Ollie has died for him and Kara.
Yeah. When Luthor interrupts Mar's experiment, Mar Nouveau says, "Another ancient zealot." And I thought, what does he mean by that? Did somebody else try to stop his experiment? Did a Guardian try to stop his experiment?
Maybe just some of his fellow Malthusians.
Maybe.
As Krona had trouble with some of the other Owens when he was planning his viewing of the origin of the universe party.
I just thought that was another ancient zealot. Okay.
It is an odd line. I probably didn't even understand what he was saying when I was watching this, because that is an odd thing to say.
So whether it was maybe it's an untold story, maybe it's something that they just couldn't film. We'll talk a little bit about some of the backstory when we get to those text pages that might shed light on some of that stuff. Some of what the Martian Manhunter had to do felt a little pointless. I was kind of questioning, like, why is he the one? Like, I was like, what's going on? What's going on here? And then we get to the Dawn of Time. Yeah, that's it. Those are my notes. Again, the loose notes, because this, as you mentioned, it's a it's a confusing sequence. It's, you're sort of watching it just to watch it, to get us to a point, to get us to a certain point. Maybe it's Wolfman's way of messing around with these characters. I don't know, but yeah, let's just get to the end. I think we're ready.
Gonna say for a third time, it's not for nothing. This thing was made in the same year that Avengers Endgame was made, so I think that it was inspired in part by that.
Right.
All right, so we're at the dawn of time. The Anti-Monitor and his Shadow Demon horde are present there in the antimatter universe. And there's a big fight, and everyone's using their powers to zap and blast and punch and kick these shadow demons, which explode real good and real easy. Even I've already complained once about the visual design of the shadow demons, and I'm disappointed in that. But they're not nearly as terrifying as the ones in the comic because they can't cancel you out with a touch. I mean, we're not really sure what these things can do to you. They just kind of point their clawed fingers at you and go, "Ooh," when you're just supposed to assume that they can mess you up in some way. But we never actually see them zapping someone with their antimatter touch. We see that a few times in the comics, so we understand just how dangerous these things are. Here, they're just fodder, and they're just even like the White Canary can just kick them away. And so there's a lot of that happening. Just the Paragons do whatever they can to zap these things. Lex has his laser hands. Ryan just kind of cowers someplace, I think. He has no powers after all. And in the midst of all this, finally, Ollie as Spectre hits the scene, and he and the Anti-Monitor go mano a mano up on a kind of a cliff or a hilltop overlooking the rest of the action. And they grapple with each other, a la the cover of Crisis Number 10. And eventually Ollie says a permutation of his hero catchphrase, "You have failed this city." He tells the Anti-Monitor, "You have failed this universe." And he throws back his head, and a big I-beam, sky beam comes out of Ollie's eyes, and he yells, and the Anti-Monitor goes, "No." And that does the trick, apparently. Ollie just shoots this sky beam at the sky, and a big swirly patch of orbiting light appears in the sky above him. He and the Anti-Monitor fall, and as the battle with the shadow demons winds down below, the Paragons, they're told, I think a little earlier than this, Ollie has to tell them that they're instrumental in sparking the rebirth of that which has been destroyed. And they question him, well, how do we do that exactly? And he gives them an unsatisfying, vague answer and goes off and has his fight with the Anti-Monitor, while they eventually decide that the best way they can help spark the multiverse is to just stand there dramatically in a row and watch. And somehow that helps, and Ollie's able to do what he does, and Barry zips up there to his side. He brings Sarah, the White Canary, along with him, and the two of them kneel by Ollie's side, and he has a second dramatic death in the same crossover event. This time he's a ghost, and he's somehow dying, and I don't know where he's going to go from there, but he tells him that the swirling patch of light above their heads with little spheres of matter coalescing within it, that's the beginnings of a new universe or multiverse. And so he's succeeded, and he dies a second time, happy with two people who love him standing by his side. And it's all kind of maudlin, and that's kind of where this episode ends. Mm-hmm. With a big conflagration of violence and creation and a little bit of hope. And the Paragons helped.
Yeah. And again, it's an Arrow episode, and that is very similar to many other seasons where this is not the last episode, but usually the last episode, possibly the last two episodes, was a big, gigantic fight of, people overcoming great odds, some kind of sacrifice, usually, and Ollie finding the way to overcome whatever it is he has to overcome, and this is just the same formula told in a giant cosmic version, which is why when he does say that line, "You have failed this universe," I think I laughed all the times that I watch it, because it just seems so ridiculous.
It kind of is, but it works. So
it does work.
You can laugh at how bad it is and also how good it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, lots to talk about here. When they say that they talk about changing history, time, whatever, the dawn of time is the only place it can happen. That is straight Crisis language.
Indeed.
We haven't gotten to those episodes yet in our Crisis tapes, but that, maybe that's the Wolfman's fingers in that bit of dialogue. The anti-monitor says, after 10,000 years, I'll be victorious. Is that the same time frame that we got at the beginning of the episode with the monitor?
Well, it was supposedly 10,000 years prior to the present day when Mar-Novu made his big mistake, but it's got to be a lot longer than 10,000 years from then back to the dawn of time, because the universe is more than 20,000 years old.
Right.
Most of us can agree on that.
Yeah. So I guess that makes me think, as you said, the anti-monitor says, they're saying, well, how can he exist? And he says, well, there's Novus. Thank you, Novu in other multiverses, but or is it just that the anti-monitor went back in time, like the comic book version one went back to where his beginnings? Like, if everybody else is rushing back to time, maybe he's like, well, I'll go back to my time too, I guess.
Maybe he stopped off at the vanishing point just to avoid the backlash of history being altered and then skipped back to...
Right.
I would have accepted that as an explanation before I would what we got.
Yeah.
Another Mar-Novu from some other universe. Just right.
Some other comic book echoes when Ollie shoots the beams into the sky. And a lot of that could be him. That's his sacrifice, right? Like that's his heroic sacrifice, that he is such a... Monitor kept saying that he is such a pivotal point to all of this. And then we get meta. We've already said it. He is the personification of the Arrowverse. So his sacrifice, his life essence, his force, his whatever, the whole thing began with him. So of course the whole thing is going to begin with him again, so it's the ultimate. The fans are like, yay, look, Ollie is giving his life, so we still have some shows to watch, But I also saw it as, this is a weak connection, when Anti-Monitor and the Spectre are fighting in the comic book, they see Krona's experiment. They see that window, that screen, and they realize that the villains failed, right? And I was like, oh, that kind of visually has the same thing where he's just releasing his energies into some random, part of the sky, It made me think of that. It's a loose connection. Just made me think of that.
I see.
Okay, so let's talk about the Paragons and their Care Bear stare.
Say it. Say how much you
care. Again, going back to Crisis Issue 10, Spectre fights the Anti-Monitor with all of the magicians behind him, right? All that line of magicians who are giving him power.
Hands, yeah.
So you have Wolfman writing this episode. Is that his hand where he's like, well, okay, you got these Paragons. What do? Well, they could act like the magicians did. We gave them these titles, humanity, love, what were the other?
Hope, courage. Blah, blah, blah.
Is that what, kind of like the Rainbow Lanterns, is that the thing that you need to make a new universe? You need the 7, instead of the 7 vices, the 7 virtues or whatever, and that's the reason why you need filtered through the heroism of Ollie. Blah, 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 blah. There you go.
If they could have spent a few more of their budget dollars on adding like little CGI energy auras to all 7, maybe even 7 different colors to make it look like they are actually contributing something to what Ollie is doing beyond just standing there in a row looking at it, I might have felt the whole Paragon concept was a little more justified. But as
Right.
it is, they're just I like the Care Bear stare analogy.
And wasn't there something with the book? Didn't the book make an appearance again or something?
Which book? The Book of Destiny?
Yeah.
Book of, I don't know. The Book of Destiny supposedly was destroyed at the end of Elseworlds, so they had to once again do a quick continuity patch to say, "Oh, I went back in time and got it." It was the Monitor who said that in one of the earlier episodes.
Yeah.
But I don't think we actually see it anymore in episodes 4 and 5.
Okay. I have a line here. There was an end and there was a beginning. I don't quite remember what that was from. Dying is the easy part. Ollie says the real heroes keep going. And he says, okay, so remember last episode I talked about how the crossovers did a really good job of creating the CW's version of the Trinity of Ollie, Green Arrow, Flash, and Supergirl. I was a little disappointed that it wasn't Supergirl at his side and that it was Sarah.
Well, I wasn't disappointed simply because Sarah is a character who's from Ollie's show and knows him better. So it did make, in that sense, more sense for her to be up there. I know what you're saying as far as symbolism and Ollie giving his life for these two characters specifically, and like you say, the Trinity aspect.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an early version of the script may even have had Kara in there. But I'm personally glad that someone who knew Ollie much better, who actually had been born on the same Earth as he had, or in the same universe, I should say, since Kara wasn't born on Earth.
Right.
But Sarah made it made more sense in that respect.
Yeah. That would have been interesting to see if they did, because even the line, this new world needs both of you. Well, you just had a whole argument with Monitor that it was Flash and Barry that was the best of you, and it's like, so that's when I got to that this time. It didn't affect me when I first watched it because I wasn't thinking in those terms. And then the second time for this episode, I was like, wait, you just logically, if you follow the argument of what Ollie's sacrifice was for, it's been about Barry and Kara, really, so that.
But Sarah loved him more, so
sure. But I was a little disappointed. Actually, I was a little disappointed. I was like, what I do love about it is, as you mentioned, she really then inherits the Arrowverse, if you want to say, because even though Flash is the one that then becomes the flagship show, Sarah is the only other one, even though she was a different actress, I think, in the pilot. I think it was later that it became, what's her name?
Can't tell you.
Yeah, but in terms of who are the oldest characters left within the Arrowverse, it's Ollie and Sarah, so it's like, that's kind of cool. I do enjoy that. And I feel that's worthy of having her there. So, and then as you mentioned, Ollie really dies, and that's it. Okay. On to our final chapter.
All right. So this is episode 5, the final chapter. This is your aftershocks and final crisis. Kind of smushing together the events of episodes of issues 11 and 12 of the original Maxi series. This is technically a Legends of Tomorrow episode. Season 5 episode special is its official designation. It aired right after episode 4 on Tuesday, the 14th of January 2020, and it was written by Kito Shimizu and Ubaid Mohammed. And let's see. So we open somewhat violently as Supergirl is having a nightmare. It's this fast-paced, disturbing montage of quickie images from Crisis, and then suddenly she wakes up on her own sofa in her own little apartment in National City. And her sister, Alex, is close at hand, telling her, oh, no, you're awake finally. Yeah. And she fell asleep watching television, and she's astonished to learn that she looks out her window. National City is still there. It looks like everything is intact. Alex is wondering what the heck she's raving about. But Alex, she just kind of leaves eventually, and then trusts that Kara will get on with her life once she's snaps herself out of whatever bad dream she'd been having. Then Supergirl Kara gets a call from Nia Naltor, the Dreamer, who was a supporting character, another masked hero of National City, and an ancestor of Dream Girl from the Legion of Superheroes. Fun side note. She calls Supergirl, the two of them are co-workers in whatever media company they're working for at this point in the Supergirl show. It's probably still Catco. And tells her, they're giving out this year's Nobel Peace Prize downtown. Can you get down here really quickly? I'm trying to save you a seat. And Kara uses her super speed, gets there, only to discover to her horror that the Peace Prize is being given to Lex Luthor. So Kara is just kind of sits there with her mouth open in disbelief while everyone around her applauds for Lex Luthor, and she asks Nia, "Are they serious about this?" And Nia's response is something like, "Yeah, isn't it great when these things go to someone who really deserves them?" So apparently everyone in this new reality thinks of Lex Luthor as a great benefactor and philanthropist and just an all-around great person instead of the mass-murdering criminal mastermind that only Kara seems to remember that he really is. So she's just kind of trapped in sort of a waking nightmare, and she's pleased when she gets word that there's a villain rampaging down at the National City waterfront. So she gets the heck out of there. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm skipping a scene. After the Peace Prize ceremony, she goes to the DEO where she talks to Alex, and Alex pretty much confirms what Nia had already been saying to her, that Lex Luthor is not only a good guy, he's the best guy, and not only that, he's their boss. And then Kara looks down at the floor in the lobby of the DEO and sees the DEO logo, and underneath it, a Luthor Corp subsidiary engraved right there in the floor tile. And she realizes what a horrible Twilight Zone she's awoken in. Then John Jones walks in, and finally sanity reasserts itself because he's a fellow Paragon, and he too remembers the world that had been, Earth 38 as it had been, and Lex Luthor as the villain he had been. So at least Kara's reassured a little bit there. But then Alex comes over and tells her, "Oh yeah, there's a villain rampaging down to the waterfront." And so Kara says, "Yeah, I need to go punch something." Flies away to deal with that. And there's a very brief little fight scene in the brilliant sunshine down at the National City waterfront. It's Weather Witch, it turns out, of a character that viewers of The Flash might remember as a villain The Flash has fought in the past. But Supergirl has no idea who she is, and Weather Witch seems a little offended by that, because she knows who Supergirl is. Mm-hmm. But Supergirl just kind of basically flicks her quickly, and well, actually, she doesn't even get to, because the Flash buzzes in, punches her once, knocks her fancy weather-controlling staff out of her hand, and that's the whole fight. And the two of them exchange pleasantries, and Kara asks Flash what he's doing on her Earth. And he says, wait, your Earth? This is my Earth, isn't it? And then look around and they realize, wait a minute, something's not right here. And then an aging fanboy named Marv comes shuffling up to them. You can guess which Marv this is, making this appearance on Crisis on Infinite Earths Chapter 5, and asks them to autograph a photo he happens to have of the two heroes together that neither of them remembers posing for. And little nonplussed, they ask Marv, "Is it usual for us to be together?" And he says, "Oh, well, sometimes there's other people, like usually there'll be like a legend or two involved. And how long have we been together on this same planet? Since forever?" So that's that's just a really great cameo.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we to the act break yet, or how far do we go?
We can end there if you would like. Yeah.
Okay. Let's end there then.
Okay. Let's keep going with the Marv Wolfman thing, because that's just, first of all, it's the two characters that he gets the most heat for killing in the original Crisis.
Here he is asking them for their autographs.
Right. And that he actually gets to make amends, if you want to say, or just, it's full circle. It's just all full circle for the Wolfman to have that moment. He says, "I just love it when you guys teamed up." It's, he says last year, even Batwoman joined in. Mm-hmm. I did like when he says, "Make it out to Marv." I was like, why didn't either of them go, "Wow, that sounds a lot like Mar Novu. What, who are you?"
Yeah, the Monitor's forgotten by this time. And I don't mean literally that they don't remember the Monitor because of Crisis time alterations. He's just not a part of the story anymore, and the writers didn't feel like even mentioning him.
It would have been fun to do how Stan Lee was kind of mixed in with the Watchers and the MC universe, and that's why he had all the cameos, because, that's, some people even said maybe he is a Watcher. Like if they would have made, because we didn't need a Monitor anymore, he just became Marv Wolfman, like, because his name is in it. Like Mar Novu is basically in his name.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. As you mentioned, this is straight out of issue 11 with Superman of Earth 2 waking up in an apartment and then going to the Daily Planet, and he's thinking, oh, it's my Daily Star, but it's not. Now it's Supergirl doing that. So that's a nice parallel there from the comic to the CW show.
Definitely.
And then it made me think too, you mentioned how like only the Paragons are the ones who remember. That's a comic book thing from the Crisis. Anybody who was there at the beginning of time, they were the only ones who remembered.
And all their allies and supporting cast and even villains had no recollection of there ever being more than one Earth.
Right. And in that comic or in the Crisis, I mean, there was a heck of a lot of people who were there at the beginning of time. But in this one, it's just, as you mentioned, the Paragons. So that made me think too, did they have to think about that? It ultimately doesn't mean anything, because John is going to go around and restore everybody's memories anyway. But it's like, did they have to go, well, of course it has to be one from every show that we have, plus this character and this character, because we need them to remember that this happened, whether it was because they need it for story purposes, whether they need it because they want somebody to remember that Ollie was killed. But it doesn't matter, because John, like I said, John winds up, everybody starts to, he's like, suddenly everybody knows, he's like, I'm going to let you all know what happened. Fun opening. I have to say, I really enjoyed the opening to this episode because of that.
Yeah, people's confusion and fear of their flagging sanity is not always this much fun to watch, but...
Yeah. Well, plus, that was the other point I wanted to make too. The idea of revamping Luthor's place within the larger universe too just gets the writers out of so many things. First of all, they brought him back to life in the Crisis, that because he was dead before it. But then they can just say, great, we don't have to focus on any of the things that he did in the past, because we are clean slating. I mentioned last episode, what are some of the goals of the CW's Crisis? Well, one of them can be, wow, we can get rid of a bunch of dangling plot threads, and suddenly we can come up with a whole bunch of new stuff. So that's the first big one, I guess you could say. And we'll get some other ones later, but then we'll definitely get them after this whole event as well.
Yeah, good point. He's setting them Lex up to be a different kind of heavy for Supergirl, one that she can't just punch. And kind of like post-crisis Lex in the comics, kind of think of it. Yeah. And Lena is still in there too, because she's mentioned at one. Alex Danvers mentions him at one point, or her at one point. Yeah. So the next thing we see after that scene down at the waterfront with Marv and Flash and Supergirl, we go to Central City, where one of the infinite number of Welleses, presumably the last one left since there's not a multiverse anymore, Nash Wells, the Indiana Jones type Tomb Raider explorer type, and super egotist, who was the person who released the Anti-Monitor from his tomb and set all this in motion. He's no longer got the role or the costume or the power of Pariah. He's just his normal human annoying self again, but he's lying unconscious on the ground in a sewer where he's found by a couple of public works employees, right in front of the spot in that sewer where the Anti-Monitor's tomb no longer is. The camera lingers meaningfully on a blank section of sewer wall, and the tomb is not there. So he's the sewer workers just call for help, and he ends up in a later scene in a hospital gurney, still unconscious at, of course, Star Labs, being cared for by Caitlin Frost. Meanwhile, and then we cut again to Star City, a giant caption on the screen to show us that that's where we are, and we see Sarah Lance, the White Canary, another very confused Paragon, wandering in sort of a disoriented daze through the streets, nearly hit by a car, as she tries to fathom what has happened and how she can be back home again suddenly. So she's called Ray Palmer, and they're going to meet up at the same bar where they'd been playing trivia when they were summoned to join in all this crisis craziness, and discovers that Ray remembers nothing of the crisis or the existence of a multiverse or meeting all these other characters and a Superman version of himself. But then John Jones wanders in, because as you mentioned earlier, Peter, and I'm so glad they decided to roll with this, John Jones has been traveling from city to city, as he puts it, finding as many of their friends and colleagues as possible and just doing a quick telepathic info dump to as many of them as possible, so that suddenly they remember, oh my God, there were all these other Earths and all these other heroes, and I didn't used to live on the same Earth with all these other people, and so it's sanity is sort of restored. It's comforting, both to the various characters who are suffering the horror of having a set of memories that the rest of the world doesn't share. Suddenly there's a larger group of people who share those memories, and it's also comforting to the viewer, because personally I would have shared their aggravation at that. So he gives Ray Palmer that treatment, and then he proceeds to go fill in a few other supporting cast members as well. Sarah's next stop is the Arrow bunker, where she grieves with some of the other members of the Arrow gang. They've been filled in by John already, not only as to the events of Crisis, but to the fact that Ollie is no more, that he's died twice. So Diggle is there, Wild Dog is there, and some lady who's had a lot of plastic surgery done is there. I don't know what character that is.
That is the new Black Canary. Her name is Dinah.
That's a good name for a Black Canary.
Yeah, she took over, or eventually she would take over as captain of the police force and from Quentin, and she somehow gets. I haven't gotten to that part yet in Arrow, but she is a Black Canary.
And how's she related to Sarah Lance?
Not at all.
Okay, so her last name isn't Lance?
No, it might be Dinah Drake.
Well, that would make sense too. That was the Golden Age Black Canary's name, the mother of Dinah Lance.
Yeah, she played Dinah Drake.
Okay, and supposedly no relation.
I can't 100% answer that, but I don't think she does. I also think does she have the Sonic Scream? I don't remember. I don't think so.
She didn't use it in this episode anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, she just basically worked the monitors and coordinated from the Arrow bunker.
Arrowverse went through many a canary.
I'm getting that impression.
Yes.
You mentioned more than one actress per canary in some cases.
And just, more than, Laurel played the Canary of Earth 1 and of Earth 2, and there's a white canary and just a canary and the black canary, it just way too many.
Yeah. So anyway, the one that's most important here is Sarah Lance, the white canary of this story, the Paragon Canary, and she gets to mourn a bit with Diggle and the gang, and showing that she's still a little bit in denial that Ollie is truly gone since he's died twice, but slowly, I guess it sinks in for her and everyone else that Ollie is one person who wasn't going to make it back. Eventually, Kara and Barry are also informed that Ollie is gone and has not been seen again since. There's some mention of Felicity is name dropped several times throughout this crossover, but Felicity Smoke never actually appears.
Right.
And we get a little bit of closure on that count in the additional material we'll be talking about after we're done talking about this episode. But here in this episode, one of the Arrow gang characters just kind of, we can ask Felicity to do a search, like she's some kind of search engine or something, as opposed to probably the one character who would most mourn Ollie's passing. But nope, she does not appear anywhere here. All right, and then, because this is a Legends of Tomorrow episode, there must be ridiculousness. So before we go to commercial and this act ends, we take a little time out to deal with an incidental threat that's going to fill some runtime, and it's a 3-story tall, talking blue and purple plush toy named Bebo. who apparently appeared in an earlier episode of Legends when the Legends characters had to use 6 magic totems to animate him or something. It all sounds very strange, and it's certainly strange here too. And he's 3 stories tall. He wasn't that big last time he appeared, and he's rampaging through Star City. And that's about where we cut to commercial.
Yeah. Bebo is so ridiculous, but I love it. It also, when those episodes happen before the crisis, it is also very much the Care Bear thing where they all have to unite to become Bebo, and he fights a giant whatever. I think, is it during the Neron season? I don't remember. Love Bebo. I know it's ridiculous, but man, that became like their unofficial mascot. And to see him here, it reminds me of something. I know there was like some event at DC, maybe it was Marvel, I don't remember. And then when they restore whatever it is, the next battle they have is like with some giant whatever, or maybe I'm thinking of Chemo. I don't know, but just I loved it because, as you mentioned, it is a Legends episode. So it was like, yes, Bebo, yay. Seeing the flashbacks, Sarah getting her flashback, Ray getting flashback, very similar to Chapter 4, a tour through their life, their memories. Some of that is fun. There's a debate, right, after the original crisis ended in 1980, 85, 86. Marv Wolfman talked about who was really going to remember the crisis. And as we read those comics back at that time, it took a while for other writers to just stop mentioning the crisis. There was quite a long time after that. You didn't yet get the notion that it was this thing that they didn't remember, and the events weren't the way that we read them, So it made me wonder with this, why did they choose to have everybody remember it outside of, we need them to mourn Ollie, of course, and we want them to remember his sacrifice. But I just thought it was interesting that they just went right in on, no, we want everybody to remember. I mean, if the point is to bring everything together, well, that was the comic book's goal. Maybe it wasn't necessarily the TV show's goal.
It is a little hard to say.
Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting that they're like, oh yeah, let's just have everybody remember. Why not?
Yep, we don't have to have them make a big deal of it in ongoing episodes of their individual series, but for now, just, I guess just for the benefit of the viewers, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And also to make it possible for there to be yet one more big fight scene with the Anti-Monitor. They need to remember that what had preceded these events, and to remember the big bad that made them happen.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, John is the one who tells everybody when we restarted the universe, our worlds combined. And then we get some dialogue with Pariah where he says, Pariah released the Anti-Monitor, but it was all going to happen anyway. The cloud and the stuff was still on its way. I wrote, is it Pariah's fault? Because in the Crisis version, in this version, Monitor did the experiment. Wouldn't the Anti-Monitor have escaped? Wouldn't the Anti-Monitor have escaped with the worlds destroyed? Pariah says, you fixed my mistake. John says, not entirely. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's referring to the fact that there are still countless universes and many of their inhabitants that no longer exist. So there's still, I mean, they were able to save just one universe out of however many were collapsed down into it. So yeah, there's still a great many casualties. Plus, a lot of those realities have lost their autonomy and are now kind of forced to exist in this new amalgamated state.
Right.
It's not happy for everyone. For example, Kara now has, Lex Luthor now gets to be the big cheese philanthropist, and Kara has to deal with the fact that he's not going to see justice for the suffering he caused in the old reality. So just for one small example. So yeah, there's still a great many deaths on Nash Wells's head, because I do think that he is still, and obviously John Jones agrees, that for releasing the Anti-Monitor, he is still much to blame.
Yeah.
Maybe not as much as Mar Novu himself for having gone back in time and created the Anti-Monitor in the first place, but still. And I do love that scene. I'm sorry, I didn't mention it in my recap here because I didn't remember where it fell before or after the commercial break. But yeah, it's when John Jones shows up at Star Labs and gives Caitlin Snow the mind jolt. And then when Nash Wells wakes up, he too is given it so that he can remember just the incalculable damage his arrogance and curiosity caused. And I love the intensity of, I think David Harewood is the name of the actor who plays John Jones, but I just love how just furious he is, and has a perfect right to be, because this guy's basically he's a party to genocide, and just like infinite genocide, basically. And there's nothing he can ever say or do can ever really compensate. And yet it doesn't take until like his next appearance on camera before his original arrogance has already reasserted himself and he's acting like an ass again. So that's, there we go. But I'm glad that at least John Jones is able to emote, just because he usually keeps his cool, or that character does. But when it comes to what this man has done, he wants to make sure he understands exactly how much right John Jones has to be angry at him.
Right. Okay, part 3.
All right, part 3 resumes the Bebo invasion as he's kind of stomping around, and there's some classic, 50s giant monster movie camera work going on, like bird's eye view of people running in terror, policemen stopping to futilely fire their guns as this giant furry Cuddle creature walks around going, "Bebo hungry, Bebo want cuddles," roar. And it's silly and wonderful. And he just happens to be rampaging right near where Mick Rory, alias Rebecca Silver, the romance novelist, is having a book signing. And Bebo ruins it, and Rory storms out into the street and joins the other heroes present. Barry is there, Kara is there, Kate Kane happens to show up. And I think I guess Ray Palmer is also part of the team that tries to stop Bebo. Rory fires his flamethrower at Bebo, and it makes him angry, but doesn't stop him. They get a big steel cable, and Barry winds it around Bebo's legs, and all those present lend their strength to trying to yank it and trip Bebo up. But instead, the coil of wire just passes right through his legs as if they weren't there. And it's at that point that Kate Kane as Batwoman shows up. So we know that she exists on this new composite Earth as well. And she says, yeah, probably. She basically tells him this is probably a diversion. But for what? And it's Heatwave who says, I know what I would do if I were using this as a diversion. And we cut to a jewelry store that's being robbed by Sargon the Sorcerer. I guess he must have made a prior appearance on one of the shows. But in the Arrowverse, Sargon is not a Golden Age hero. He's just a cheesy, flamboyant jewel thief who has some minor mystical abilities. So I think the Flash and Sarah Lance show up to stop him. Sarah punches him in the face. He falls over. The Bebo illusion dissolves into smelly sludge. The end. And so that is the end of our ridiculous interlude. And but it isn't really, because as everybody who feels like it is gathered in the Arrow bunker for champagne toast to victory over Bebo and Sargon, and I guess Ollie's memory as well, Sarah is off brooding in a local park. Barry comes to have a heart-to-heart with her as they, commiserate over the loss of Ollie and what that means to both of them. And Barry talks about having lost his parents. And in the middle of all that, suddenly a shadow demon swoops in and tries to kill them both. But since the shadow demons are kind of ineffectual, they just kind of zap them with speed force energy and punches and kicks. And they quickly tumble to the conclusion that the shadow demons are being dispatched to kill Paragons. It's something of a conclusion to leap to, because it could be just an isolated incident. It could be that the shadow demons are coming after them for other reasons, but they just assume, Paragons. And it turns out they're right, and it's a good thing that they follow that hunch, because they go to try and find where Ryan Choi and his family are living in this new world, because he would be the Paragon most at risk, because he has no powers to defend himself with. And so, sure enough, Ryan and his baby daughter are huddling in the baby's nursery, hiding from this shadow demon that's attacking them in their home. And the shadow demon throws the door to the nursery open to get at Ryan. You'd think they'd be able to pass through the door, or maybe negate its positive matter structure with their touch. Sorry to keep harping on that, but that's what makes antimatter shadow demons cool and scary, that they can do that. But instead, it pushes the door open, and it's about to get them when I think it's Sarah that leaps in behind. I guess Flash must have run them both there at super speed, and she kicks it, and it evaporates. And so they get Ryan, and they gather all the Paragons together in the Arrow bunker, and they talk strategy. These shadow demons are back. How and why is this happening? And then Nash Wells walks in. I mean, we don't really find out how he gets there and why he decides to go to Star City, how he knows that's where they're all going to be. But he walks in with his antimatter detector that he's recently built strapped to his arm, saying, hey, there's a flux in antimatter energy in the area, so maybe your problems aren't over yet. They all assume that he's been detecting the Bebo illusion, but nope, it's something else, something far worse. Somewhere in there, there's a scene back at Star Labs where... oh, no, that's later. I beg your pardon. I think that happens when plans have already been drawn up to combat the Anti-Monitor, if he is in fact resurgent and coming for them. And they kind of assume that he is. So I guess when they're all convened in when all the Paragons and their friends and allies are convened in the Arrow bunker, they're tossing around ideas for how they might be able to destroy the Anti-Monitor. And the fact that he's made out of antimatter makes that difficult. Rory suggests tossing him into the sun, since his answer to everything is burn it. And Nash points out that would create a antimatter explosion that would annihilate the entire solar system and possibly more. So that's off the table. But it's the two shrink experts, Ray Palmer and Ryan Choi, who, as we know in DC Comics post-crisis continuity, eventually becomes an atom. They kind of compare ideas, and they come up with the idea to come up with a kind of shrink bomb that, instead of, since antimatter, like matter, can't really be destroyed, it can only be altered or moved from place to place, they will come up with a perpetual shrink grenade that will shrink the Anti-Monitor forever and ever and ever smaller, down into a subatomic realm that Ray wants to call the Atomverse, but Ryan wants to call the Microverse. And Ray agrees that's a better name, but there might be some trademark issues involved. So they decide on that plan, and that's when Ray and Ryan decide they're going to break off and build this thing. And I guess Lex contributes to. He agrees to go with them back to Star Labs to help make their idea reality. And Mick, Rory, Heatwave goes along with them as to be protection, I guess.
Lots of, again, it's a Legends episode. Lots of meta stuff. They love to poke fun at the comic book universe. A lot of discussion about, you got shanghaied into another crossover, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, that was those two supporting characters from the Legends cast, right?
Ava and Nate, yeah. Okay,
thank you, because I had no idea who they were.
Yeah, Ava is that iteration of Vixen, and Nate is Steel, Commander Steel.
Oh,
or
okay.
A version of Steel, yeah. Mm-hmm. Seeing Rory again made me realize that they never really did anything with that alternate version of Heatwave that was babysitting young Jonathan Kent. I guess because he didn't go to the beginning of time, he just gets wiped out, or whatever.
Jonathan is safe. We know that because there was a throwaway mention that even Argo is out there someplace. Mm-hmm. So everything from Supergirl's reality, well, except for Lex as a villain and probably some other details, is still around. So I guess, yeah. And we know that Tyler Hoechlin, Superman, is still in existence because Oh, actually, yeah, there's, never mind. There's more about the Super Sons later.
Sure. Yeah, right. That selfie that Adam takes of, I guess it's him and Supergirl, is it? With Bebo in the background. That actually became a real selfie. He really took that selfie of them, and then they, morphed all the other stuff in it. That was fun. Sarah taking point. Again, it's a Legends episode, but she's the captain of the Legends, and she quickly, it feels like she's assuming the Arrow role as well as being the one that everybody's going to follow, which I liked. Wild Dog saying, "Is this really what all crossovers are like?" Yes. This is Sargon's first appearance. I wondered what you thought of him, because I know I don't know if he's one of your favorites, but I do remember you talking about him before.
I do like him a lot, and so I think he deserves a little better than this.
In many ways, Nash is still like Pariah. He still has to hang around. He's still sensing some danger, just like Pariah did in issues 11 and 12 of the Crisis.
Good observation.
Here's that point that I was trying to remember when I was talking about the Trinity, when I was talking about Sarah being there. It's not only that Ollie and Sarah are the oldest characters, it's that Ollie is the only one left who knew Sarah before she became what she became.
There we go. She did say something during her chat with Barry about how she always thought there'd be someone there who knew what I was like before I got on that boat.
Right.
I guess Ollie was the last one who did.
Rory's line about throwing the anti-monitor into the sun, not terribly unlike what actually happens to him in Crisis 12. Sort of.
It's more like he turns into a sun, really. A living, killing fireball.
Yeah, and then when Superman of Earth 2 punches him, doesn't he go in that, like the remains of him crash into the binary sun or something like that? And that causes that, yeah.
But it was in the antimatter universe, that final battle, so it didn't create the matter-antimatter violent reaction that Nash was worried about.
And to your point about Nash going back to his arrogance, where he goes off to make the device and they're like, I guess they say something like, "How are you going to do that?" And he's like, "Leave that to me, D-Leagues." And then he storms off.
Okay. See, he's the one who. So Lex was not present. It was Nash being the arrogant science asshole.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Lex was one Paragon that didn't seem to be involved. I guess they didn't care if the Shadow Demons got him.
So, and that's all my notes for that.
All right, then we're just about ready for the big final offensive against the somehow resurgent anti-monitor. Mm-hmm. All right, so the heroes arrive en masse when I guess Dinah, she's the one who gives them the word that a being answering the anti-monitor's description. Well, no, actually, it's the Shadow Demons are converging, and I guess they kind of swirl around and the anti-monitor appears in their midst. But she tells them that they're converging at a point called Gardner Pier, which is on Perez Landing. So I think we can infer here that Gardner's Pier is named after Gardner Fox. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they couldn't call it Fox Pier because there's that's a Disney trademark now.
Oh,
and then Perez Landing, of course, kind of speaks for itself. But so the heroes converge there. Even Wild Dog gets into costume and goes along. I kind of love that. Wild Dog is going to try to fight the Anti-Monitor, along with a few other superpowered allies. So Tyler Hoechlin's Superman, formerly the Superman of Earth 38, now just the only Superman. He's going to join in that fight, along with all the other Paragons that we've come to know. John Jones is sporting a slightly new costume, new Earth, new look, as he puts it. And they stalk over there and they just kind of stand in line and wait for the Anti-Monitor to reform, and they just vow that the Anti-Monitor taunts them. He says something to the effect of, "I am destiny incarnate, inexorable and inescapable." So yet another non-explanation for how the hell he can still be there. But there he is, and he needs to be fought, and he will be fought. And so the heroes just do whatever's in their capability and whatever's within the visual FX budget to fight this guy. He grows to gigantic proportions so that the heroes can just fly around him and bounce off his chest. It's a lot like the cover to Crisis number 12 is kind of the idea. Although the Anti-Monitor, annoyingly, is still not wearing any kind of headgear. Still, it just doesn't feel like the Anti-Monitor if he doesn't have some kind of freaky helmet. But so he's a big CGI version of the Anti-Monitor, just acting like King Kong, just roars and swats, and the heroes buzz around him like gnats. Meanwhile, back at Star Labs, shadow demons are trying to attack the handful of Paragons who are trying to make this shrink bomb, and it's up to the team of Killer Frost and Heatwave to protect them. So an interesting character meeting there. And with a surprise assist by, out of nowhere, Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning. So he now also, from, I guess, Earth 73 was also folded into this mishmash Earth, and he just kind of randomly appears from Freeland, and he just walks into Star Labs. I guess he explains that the Martian showed up and gave him the same mental PowerPoint presentation he gave everyone else, and probably suggested that he head over to Star Labs in Central City to help out with whatever was going on there. And so he zaps a couple of shadow demons too. And so then eventually the battle back at Perez Landing gets to the point where I guess the team at Star Labs radios to Sarah and tells them, we could use some fast hands to put this thing together. So Barry races over there. And it's a real team effort here. It was Nash and Ray and Ryan that designed and built the thing. Barry uses his super speed to put it together. And then he takes it back to the scene of the battle. And it's going to be Kara who delivers the final blow. It's put in her hands. I guess it's Ray that hands it off to her. And it tells her, throw like a girl. And this is seconds after we were kind of teased with the possibility that Kara might die in this story after all, because Superman has been grabbed by the Anti-Monitor and she's flying towards him very dramatically as if she's going to sacrifice herself to save her cousin. But instead, Ryan gives her the shrink bomb and just tells her, just deliver it fastball special style. She does. She throws it. It hits the Anti-Monitor right in the chest in the armor, and he starts shrinking away into nothing. He screams no, I think, and then just he disappears. And Superman is shrunk a little bit of the way with him, so we get a funny little moment of Tyler Hoechlin waving his arms around like, hey, I'm over here, I'm tiny. And Ray just zaps him and it makes him big again. A little bit of levity there. And so ends this threat to all of positive matter reality. So is that where we go to commercial, or do we have a montage before?
That's it.
Okay, so there's your big battle. There's more to come. There's an epilogue or two, but that's when the Anti-Monitor is finally, if he's not truly destroyed, he's at least gotten out of everyone's hair for the foreseeable future.
And it ends with, I'm assuming it's Sarah who says, thank you, Ollie. Yeah. Real quick, what did you think of this, climactic battle to get rid of the Anti-Monitor?
It was something that needed to happen. You need to fight the Anti-Monitor one more time, even if it doesn't make sense that he still exists. And I think it was a pretty cool solution they came up with as to how to defeat him. The shrink bomb thing, and the fact that it took the skills of multiple members of this team to make it happen. And I'm glad that Kara delivered the final stroke, because she owes the Anti-Monitor that from across realities. And the battle itself visually wasn't all that impressive, but it's on a TV budget. I mean, they did the best they could.
Right. Yeah, I really felt that this particular act felt I was like, wow, they really just spent all their money and they have nothing left. Where's Cisco? Why aren't the other legends actually fighting in this, even though it's a Legends episode?
Where's Felicity, while we're on the subject?
She's been gone. And I do appreciate that you mentioned the cover to Crisis number 12. There are shots that are very, very much. There's one of you're looking down at the Anti-Monitor as he's either growing or already grown, and he's swiping and grabbing, and it's like, yeah, perfect, wonderful. Superman's flying around, Martian Manhunter's flying around, Supergirl. So brilliant. I do love that. The shadow demons merging to form him is straight out of issue 4, where they all merged together to make one big giant shadow demon, so lots of visuals calling back to the Crisis, which is great. But that that they're just fighting in a pier and like a random junkyard or whatever it is. I don't know. It's kind of like, what? I am destiny incarnate, inexorable and inescapable. You are nothing, insects, fated to be crushed beneath my heel without a moment's thought. Fighting is useless, surrender. I wrote here, and I didn't look it up. I was like, I wonder if any of that is direct Crisis language. Anti-Monitor was always spouting something in those comics. So
he was, but this is more bombastic even than his dialogue from the series, I think. From the comic, that is.
We will not fail this world. I think Sarah or someone says that, which is the theme of the Arrowverse. For Oliver. And I'm glad you mentioned that too. The symmetry, the balance, Supergirl being the one to deliver the killing blow, just as the Anti-Monitor did to her. It's nice to, just like that moment with Marv Wolfman and the Flash and Supergirl, we get a little reversal here. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And that's my notes for that chapter.
All right. So we come into a little more of the of the aftershocks, clearing the wreckage of all this kind of stuff. So we come back from the commercial and we're treated to a presidential address on television on channel 52 from the person who is apparently the president of the United States in this new Gestalt Earth, some random woman, not at all the same president, which I gotta wonder if that's going to have a continuity impact on the Supergirl show, because the president of the U.S. on that show was a xenophobic white man, and he was kind of an important antagonistic presence on that show during its whole aliens as allegory for immigration laws plot of a couple of seasons. So you got to wonder if that carried across in future episodes of Supergirl. But anyway, apparently it's now President Generic Woman addressing the country and telling them about the recent anti-Monitor crisis, and it's mostly about Oliver Queen, where she's outing his identity to the world. So somebody tipped her off about this. I'm assuming one of his friends, probably Sarah, again, since, as you said, she's kind of taking the lead in the Arrowverse now, and so she might have been the one to make sure that the federal government and the president are aware of Ollie's sacrifice, and she just has no compunctions about going ahead and announcing it to the entire nation that Oliver Queen of Star City was the Green Arrow, and he was the first of our heroes. And posterity will not forget his services, and I ask you all to join in a moment of silence in his memory for having saved our nation and our world. No mention of other worlds or other universes here, but I guess the president would not have been privy to that information. So, yeah. That goes on, and we get little images of different Arrowverse heroes watching and sniffling at home. We got Kara and her sister Alex, and Kate Kane slumming at their apartment too, watching this on TV. The Barry and I guess Caitlin are watching from Star Labs. Diggle and his wife Lila, who is no longer Harbinger, I guess, and probably doesn't even remember being Harbinger. We don't know. She has no dialogue in this. And their two children are watching on TV from home, and members of the Legends crew, the aforementioned Nate and Eva, and there's some other people I'm forgetting to mention, and Tyler Hoechlin, Superman, is flying around listening on an earpiece, and then he gets a call from Lois, who says to him, yeah, honey, please get back to Metropolis in a hurry, please, it's the boys. And Superman reacts almost as if he doesn't know what she's talking about. The boys. He said, yeah, Clark, your sons. Can you get home, please? And Clark shakes his head and zips away. So that's that's something else that apparently has been changed by the events of Crisis. Because now instead of just having an infant son named Jonathan, they have two sons. And we later learn that they're teenagers, and they're the focus of a brand new CW series coming soon. So this is our first mention of those super sons. And for a second there, you almost think Clark is surprised to learn that he's got to. But then you remember he wasn't a Paragon, so he doesn't really remember, unless John told him somewhere along the line that there had been a multiverse.
Right.
So
I remember there was I talked about in chapter 1, where after Jonathan was born, before Argo got destroyed, Clark turns to Lois and says, I always thought we were going to have twins or two kids or something like that. He said that way back in chapter 1. So when it came back to this moment, and then they made that change again, one of the goals to make the change. You mentioned they have a show coming. I didn't notice that the first time I ever watched The Crisis, that he had already referenced that in his mind. He just, as I pictured it, I thought we would always have 2 kids. And it's like, oh, they really did set that one up from the beginning. So I like that.
It's cool symmetry.
By the way, the 2 kids that Diggle and Lila have, when Barry changed the Arrowverse in one of the flashpoints, he changed Sarah to... Well, they had a daughter, but then in the Flashpoint universe, they actually had a son. And Diggle found out, and he was like, "You mean I had a? Well, what happened to her?" It's like, she's gone. Well, they restore her for this, which is great.
Yep, I thought it was significant that they had 2 kids suddenly. Yeah. I remember that. I don't know under what circumstances I saw that episode or whatever show that was, but yeah, I remember Diggle being angry to learn that one child had been speedster mojo swapped for a second.
Right. It was one of the crossovers is when he had to reveal, maybe it was Invasion, where he had to reveal that that Flashpoint had happened and that there were some changes, and that's where Diggle found out. So that's probably why you saw it, because it was one of the crossovers.
Yep. And now Diggle's got the best of both realities.
Yep.
That's cool. All right, so that's a little coda there for Superman and Lois. And so the president rambles on for a while that way, and then there's a moment of silence throughout this new Earth for Ollie, who gave his life to help create it. And then we get a reprise of the opening monologue, except this time I'm pretty sure it's Stephen Amell's voice we're hearing read it as the Spectre, and he reads the same block of text that the Monitor read at the beginning of the first episode. It's with some minor modifications. In the end, there was only one, a single black infinitude. Then the infinitude found release, and finally the darkness broke, filling it with life, with the multiverse. And it goes on from there, and blah, blah, blah. And then it ends with a montage of different Earths that exist in a multiverse that exists. And this is one of the ways where I feel that this story failed itself and failed all of us. Because you don't end the crisis with, oh, there's still a multiverse, especially when most of the characters don't seem to be aware of it. It feels like something that was imposed, whatever the TV production version of editorially would be after the fact. Because these characters are not talking as if they're aware that there's more than one Earth here. A lot of the time they're talking about, they use the phrase reboot the universe, as if now there's only one. And it's a gestalt of many or most or even all of the universes that had existed before it. They're just folding Earth 1 with the Flash and Arrow and many others, and Earth 38 with Supergirl, and Earth 73 with Black Lightning, and so on. But here we're told that, oh yeah, there's a new Earth 2 where the new Stargirl series will be coming soon. And then there's Earth 12 where the Green Lantern movie took place, on which Guggenheim and Berlanti worked, and it was kind of their last project before Arrow got started. Which is kind of what led them down the road to, as you mentioned earlier, Peter, they're wanting the Arrowverse to be really grounded after they flopped with a big cosmic spectacle thing like the Green Lantern movie. But they slipped it in here as an Earth that exists in this multiverse that is somehow still, that it's having your cake and eating it too. Yeah. I'm sorry, it undercuts the tragedy of the entire Crisis narrative if you're going to have a multiverse still be there. Especially if it creates continuity issues with the Flash series too, because it's a semi-important plot. The non-existence of the multiverse and the loss of the parallel Earths that they knew, like the Earth 2 where Harry Wells came from, and Jesse Quick and so forth. It's the non-existence of that multiverse is a semi-important plot point to the Flash in later episodes of that series. They mention a couple of times over that there's no multiverse anymore. It's all just void. So I guess they're not aware that there's, because whichever producer or showrunner or whatever stuck this stuff in didn't bother to tell the Flash writing staff That there's not, and Cisco shows up too, just pops his head in before leaving the series on a more permanent basis to say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to spend some time mapping the changes to this new post-crisis Earth, and just cataloging in this big thick binder everything that's different." And he does come back to the show later, but he uses that as his kind of excuse to exit for a while. So yeah, I'm just really disappointed that we're being shown this extant multiverse here at the end of all this. So, I mentioned the new Earth 2 for Stargirl and Earth 12 for Green Lantern. There's also Earth 19 for the short-lived Swamp Thing TV series. There's Earth 9 for still Earth 9. We were shown that in the first multiverse montage at the beginning of episode 1, where the Titans live-action show is. Earth 21 for Doom Patrol. Earth 96, which is still where the Brandon Routh Superman, so that still exists. So Ray Palmer could still team up with a Superman version of himself. He just doesn't know it. And it all boils down after the ghost of Ollie finishes his monologue. We kind of close in on Earth Prime, big caption to show us that's where we are, where we get one more maudlin ceremonial group farewell to Ollie, where they've set up a little shrine with one of his uniforms and an arrowhead-shaped eternal flame on Earth Prime, and this hangar is actually an old, disused, and top secret Star Labs facility, possibly where Barry did some of his early, speed power testing in the first series of this season of his show. It's unused, it's uncharted, and Barry gathers all his fellow heroes there. There's a group of 7 of them, which is kind of a magic number as far as DC teams go. To have this little memorial for Ollie, and various characters say their last farewells. Black Lightning is invited along, which is nice of them, and he kind of taps Barry on the shoulder and says, I never knew Oliver, but he seems like he was a good dude. And that's, and they all just kind of walk away. But Black Lightning further wonders why Barry called them all out to this weird building in the middle of nowhere. And Barry gets all excited and geeky and tells them that this is a Star Labs facility. Tells them no one knows it exists. And that's good for them because it'll make a convenient meeting place in case something like the crisis ever goes wrong again. And then he unveils that he took the liberty of putting together a round table with swivel chairs with little logos on the back of them for each of them. Mm-hmm. There's a Superman symbol for Superman and a differently colored Superman symbol for Supergirl. There's a lightning bolt for Barry himself. There's a white canary for White Canary. There's the lightning bolt image from the front of Black Lightning's costume for him. There's those crossed red bars on the front of John Jones's costume for him. And who am I forgetting? Anyone?
Batwoman.
Yes, and there's a red bat symbol for her. She's also present. And he even set up a special chair with an arrowhead symbol in the back of it for absent friend Ollie. And so they all sit down in their chairs around this round table for this as yet unnamed league of heroes they've put together. And then we get... All right. Now, when I was at Penn State, I took a class called Reading Drama, which is about plays as literature. Mm-hmm. It was taught by, I guess she was an instructor or a grad student or something. I don't even remember her name. But one thing I've always remembered about that class was she told us about something that she called the ha-ha cheetah ending to a play or to any work of fiction, where characters just kind of stand around and laugh at another. It's based on the old Tarzan movies where Cheetah the chimp would do something silly like put on a hat, and the other characters would just stand there and go ha 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 ha, and Tarzan might say ha ha Cheetah, you are funny, and that would be the end of that. So she used it in reference to the 17th century comedy play The Rover by Afra Bain, but here we can use it in reference to episode 5 of Crisis because we get a literal monkey running around on the loose, because we get one last little joke where this is a Star Labs facility, and somewhere in the earlier seasons we got a cage that had Super Gorilla Grodd in it, and we got a shot of that cage after Grodd has gotten loose. We get the same thing here. There was a cage up in the upper levels of this abandoned star building which had a super monkey named Gleek. trapped in it. And we hear, ooh, ah, we hear monkey noises running around as the heroes kind of look at each other and think, uh-oh, we're going to have to deal with this now. And then we end on a quick external shot of this Star Labs hangar, which just happens to look exactly like the Hall of Justice from the Super Friends cartoon. We hear some snatches of music from the old Super Friends cartoon, and it's not the most crisis of moments. It's not, Psycho Pirate trapped in Arkham, but it's it's metatextual, it's intertextual, and it's very appropriate for the type of crisis story that this has been. And that's where we end the whole thing.
Yeah, and because it is a Legends episode as well.
Also a very good point. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah. I mean, what you were saying about the multiverse and being disappointed about that, I think my disappointment came that they set up this, and we've seen the Hall of Justice before. We saw it during the Invasion crossover, so it's not the first time we actually saw this building. But this notion that Ollie's death leads to the creation of a league, and since they are all on one planet, it would be so easy to do. My biggest disappointment is that they never really went back to this idea, at least in the episodes that I saw. So unless there's things that I haven't seen, I would have loved to have seen, the league actually form during the Arrowverse, the remainder of what was the Arrowverse. The Gleek thing, the Super Friends thing, that's all just wink and a nod for people who know. But that was my biggest disappointment. Was I was actually just really stoked by that, by this ending. I was like, yeah, let's do crossovers where they call themselves the Justice League. We already had a Justice Society running around, so why not? In terms of Crisis, it feels more like they stole that maybe from Legends, because by the end of that, we did get a Justice League. We got that one group shot of all them with, John Byrne and Dr. Fate at the end of Legend, showing these characters, so that was my biggest takeaway by the end of it. I was like, oh, come on. I want to see that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Then the Arrowverse shows started to drift apart, and some of them ended, and I think actors have gone on to other things. I guess The Flash is the last one left. Yeah.
I mean, it's done now.
Okay, so now none of them are left.
No, it's all gone. Yeah, Flash already ended several weeks back. Yeah, that was one thing that was interesting about the Crisis. We always talk about events in comics, how they can be good jumping on points, but they can be jumping off points. And for me, it really was a jumping off point for the Arrowverse. I was kind of done. I think I watched a few more episodes of Flash, and I was like, okay, whatever I was doing at the time, I got too busy and never came back to it. So
I stuck with Flash for a couple more seasons, but eventually I kind of just decided I'm not getting anything out of this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting is it almost parallels the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a way, too. When you get to your goalpost and you don't necessarily have really what's after it, it sort of flounders a bit in, okay, well, then what's the point of this now? What's the point of Arrowverse now that we don't have Arrow, that we don't have this build up, and as I talked about how all of those crossovers seem to build in characterization, in size, in money, in characters until you get to the Crisis. And I know they did a few more after that, but it's like, maybe they should have just went out and created a Justice League TV show and just like Legends was an ensemble show, cancel everything and start a Justice League, reboot your universe, right? Like the comic books wanted to do, like Marv Wolfman said, start everything at #1. And they were like, nah, we don't need to do that. It's like almost like the CW didn't learn the lessons either. Like either you knew you had your Supergirl show, Superman and Lois show coming out. Well, why couldn't we had a Justice League mixed in with, maybe if we would have gotten a few new ones, maybe not a complete reboot, but like Justice League, the Superman Lois show, Maybe spin off Ryan Choi and the Atom into a mini series or something.
Mm-hmm. I'd have watched that.
Yeah, I would have too. I mean, you introduced this new character. What the heck are you going to do with him afterwards? So,
yeah, they didn't seem to know quite what. Well, it's hard to keep going upwards from Crisis. You're right. It is kind of like the MCU. They didn't know what to do after Infinity War Endgame. It's like that was their grand climax, and what do you do for an encore?
Yeah. The whole speech with the president and seeing all the characters reminded me of Supergirl's funerals and the speech that Batgirl gives in Chicago and about heroism at the end of issue 7. There were little echoes of that for me. It was strange not to see certain characters. Like, why didn't we see Vibe at the end of this, somewhere? Even just a small little appearance would have been nice.
Yeah, I mean, he was there earlier in the crossover. Why isn't he still there now?
Yeah. And, to the point of the whole, now we have this other multiverse that they never learned the existence of. And I just quickly looked up something here where they say here, this is not anything official. It's just from kind of like an Arrowverse wiki. Residents of Earth Prime did not discover the new multiverse as the multiverse was separated with an unknown constant instead of vibrational frequency. So that was kind of like their explanation for why maybe they didn't follow up on like all this new multiverse. And, to your point, obviously they needed to keep the thing. They can't get rid of the multiverse or because they have all these other shows. And while one of the goals, if we go back to that question, what are the goals of the CW Crisis? Like, we know that they wanted to merge all their heroes onto one universe, one Earth, so they can stop having to flip-flop through portals and all that. But does that necessarily translate to we want to get rid of a multiverse, or we just want to get rid of I hate to use this word, local multiverse?
Well, it doesn't help to simplify things any, but it's a useful term. It's an accurate term.
Yeah.
Multiverse. Well, yeah, you think of multiverses as just like local nexi within a broader omniverse, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I don't think they really needed to end this thing with the saying, "Oh, yeah, there's still a multiverse with all these other shows and movies that we want you to keep watching." It seemed like an advertising showcase as much as anything else.
Or the other thing you could say, if it wasn't necessarily from the writers and the creators, if it was from the head muckety mucks, if they were like, maybe we need to do this because some people might think that all those shows are canceled because they're, you know what I mean? Like, we saw the death.
It just means that they don't need to exist or even project the possibility of their existing in the same continuum as these Arrowverse shows. I mean, they don't need to suggest that they're all part of the same multiverse,
right?
For them to exist. And I don't think anyone would assume that those shows weren't going to be made just because they weren't acknowledged in the back half of this episode.
I mean, because think about like in the opening chapter, we saw the Titans kind of looking at something, so how nervous higher ups get, and they probably go, well, what about the people who don't read comics? Maybe they think the Titan show's never coming back, so I don't know.
So they could just assume that the Titan show also is taking place on this same collective Earth, even if no crossover between the two shows ever happens, or between that show and the other shows, I should say.
It didn't bother me too much because, again, I felt like it wasn't DC's goal was to clean up their mess, but I don't think the CW's goal wasn't necessarily to clean up a mess. I'm not sure I could give you a real answer as to what their goal was, other than to just do it because the timing was right. The timing was right. The way each crossover kept building and building. It was a good send off for Stephen Amell, for Arrow. you have to wrap up the Flash subplot that's been going on for how many seasons of him dying in the Crisis, So
all of them, actually. That was straight from season 1.
Yeah. So in terms of how it ended, giving Ollie that narration, the ending to it, I was kind of like, okay, I get it. I get why they did it. And I take your point. I also can understand why they did it as well. One of the odd things I thought was that they decided to separate Doom Patrol from the Titans. That was I was like, what? The Doom Patrol was introduced in Titans, and then now you're going to... Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. It was episode 4 of season 1. Raven and Beast Boy go to the mansion, Doom Patrol mansion. They meet all the characters, but it was, who plays Chief in Doom Patrol? Is it Timothy Dalton?
Yes, I knew it was one of the former Bonds. So, yes. Right.
Yeah. Well, it was a different actor in that episode. And then Timothy Dalton, I guess, is the one who plays it in the TV show. Yeah.
There you go. Different actor, different Earth.
Right. And that's exactly what they did eventually. So, and all of the whole ending, the Super Friends ending, you have the Justice League. You have a Superman character, a Batman character, you have Flash, you have Martian Manhunter, Sarah is basically the Black Canary part of it. I mean, it's almost like they are almost all there. If you want to keep going with the whole Trinity aspect, Supergirl is basically their Wonder Woman version, so it's I loved that they really had that. It translates nicely almost to a full, the big 7 of the original Justice League. Oh, okay. So to my point, okay, what I said about this being the first appearance of the Hall of Justice, Barry does seem to talk about this place as if the invasion either didn't happen or didn't happen the way we remembered it. I did get that vibe. It was like, why is he talking about this building to people who've already been here in the invasion? Supergirl was there. Sarah was there.
I do remember Supergirl and Ollie talking to each other inside that very hangar.
Right. So maybe that was because it's a new Earth and maybe there were some changes. Who knows? And that's it. That's where my notes end.
All right.
So,
yes, that's where our coverage of this crossover ends.
Yeah. Which chapter did you say you really liked? I think it was one of the first 3.
It was one. Yeah, it was probably the first chapter. I mean, despite the fact that I thought the Shadow Demons looked kind of ghetto, actually the animation I think improved in the final 2 chapters. They at least made them a little darker in color. But I still wish they were just kind of solid black,
And did you say you watched these episodes again right before we recorded? Did you get a chance to watch it again?
Episodes 4 and 5, yes. I just rewatched them.
Did you still have the same reactions? Or were they still...
Well, I didn't react quite as violently to the reintroduction of the sort of hasty reinsertion of their, oh, look, there's a multiverse again. That was just a god-awful cop-out to me. I was really pissed about that the first time I watched this. But since I'm water long under the bridge now, it didn't affect me quite as strongly on second or third viewing.
Yeah. I wondered if our discussion of the first 3, like if that informed your rewatching at all, if there was any new ways you might have felt positively or negatively about certain things. So
not really.
Okay. Yeah, that was it. That was we obviously can't go too deep like we do with the comics because they're not trying to go super, super deep. And, we're making connections to 50 years of DC history when we talk about the Crisis. And this one, we're only talking about 8 seasons worth of shows or whatever it is.
And comparing it to just the 12 issues of the Crisis comic that preceded it.
Right. But all to say, if you've never seen the Crisis, the CW Crisis, because maybe you think it would be a cheap imitation. And while there is some point to that, it does what it needs to do. And it actually, I think, resonates a lot stronger than most people might realize. And someone did mention that they did include these chapters on one of the DVDs of like maybe Arrow season 8 or something like that. So we talked about why is there not like Crisis DVD set by itself, but it's included in one of the seasons. So
they could fit the whole thing on one disc. It's only 5 episodes long.
Yeah, plus the final season of Arrow is only like 10 episodes, so that would make perfect sense, you know, that they could squeeze it in there. So okay. Well, before we let you go, listeners, we decided, as we talked about, I think in the last episode, that we wanted to read the Crisis on Infinite Earths 100-page giants that DC was playing around with at the time. These were things that were originally sold at Walmart. There was a version that would go to Walmart. There was a version of a cover that would go to direct market. They were doing these with multiple other characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, etc., etc. And they decided to do one with Crisis. Marv Wolfman and Mark Guggenheim and Greg Berlanti all wrote different little text pieces in these 2 issues that came out, to the point of, you know, they kind of all basically said our TV version of the Crisis was inspired by the comic, so it made sense for us to also go back and do our version of the CW Crisis in a comic.
This book completes the virtuous cycle of comic book to television back to comic book.
Yeah.
Berlanti.
Yeah. So 2 issues. Most of those issues have reprints, but each issue also has 2 new stories. One of them featuring Felicity, finally.
Yep. So we see what she was doing.
Right. And that story is called Crisis on Infinite Earths by Marv Wolfman, Mark Guggenheim. Tom Derenick is your penciler. Trevor Scott, Andy Owens, your inkers. Hi-Fi colorist, Wes Abbott, letterer. I believe Tom Derenick, I think, if my memory serves, also used to draw like some of the chapters in the Smallville magazine. So he's kind of used to, you know, having to work with likenesses and things like that. Yeah. And then that's 2 chapters in both of those books. And then the second story that is also split 2 chapters per book features Luthor and Superman, or a council of Luthors. What do they call them? The
Council of Luthors.
Yeah, the Councils of Luthors. Yeah, and a Council of Superman. So that's called Infinite Luthor. Also by the same writer team, with Tom Grummett on artwork. Yay! Danny Miki as inker, Chris Sotomayor as colorist, Wes Abbott again as letterer. Shall we let's pick the first story?
Okay.
Felicity story. Give us your how do you wrap that up? How did you wrap that up?
Quick and dirty here as best we can.
Good.
Yeah, this was all reprinted in a trade paperback, which Peter was able to share with me, subtitled Paragons Rising. And that's kind of what this lead story is, featuring Felicity, because we do get told in the Crisis TV crossover that Felicity was off doing independent research to learn what she could about who the Paragons were. So this story not only fills in the Felicity-shaped hole in the TV crossover, and shows us what she was doing, what she was thinking and feeling, as she's not only trying to help fight the Anti-Monitor, but tries to cope with her feelings over Ollie's death when she eventually learns about it. Right. But it also shows what she had to do to get that information, like who the Paragons are, which is incomplete as it was. So the story begins with the Nash Wells version of Pariah doing the same thing Pariah was doing at the beginning of the Crisis story, and this was deliberate. He pops into a generic Earth called Earth N52. It's all of you DC fans out there know what that means. There's a Jumbotron image of the Justice League in the background, and they're in their new 52 outfits. Wonder Woman's got her costume trimmed with silver, and they're running into action to try to stop the crisis happening. Bethany Snow is delivering the exposition on another Jumbotron. It's just like the generic Earth that dies at the beginning of Crisis #1, the comic, and Pariah can't save it. He tries to save a father and daughter here, can't do it. Boo-hoo, oh my suffering. Not again, not again. And then he pops into, just for another fun cameo, Earth F, which is F for Fleischer, as in the Max Fleischer Studios, which made those great ink and paint Superman cartoons of the 40s. Because this is, after all, kind of a DC media multiverse, and so it makes sense that this would be one. So just to do it, they have Pariah pop in there, see 1940s Superman and Lois Lane, and watch them die also. Then we see Harbinger stop in on, and so this is another thing that they tried to compensate for the lack of in the TV crossover. We got like 2 seconds of the Ray and the Freedom Fighters of Earth X, whom we met in one of those earlier DC Arrowverse parallel Earth stories. But he wasn't able to be fit into the actual TV Crisis story. Right. So here we have Harbinger going to Earth X and summoning or collecting the Ray. So grabs him away from his freedom fighters just as Earth X is about to be destroyed, and taken back to the Wave Rider, the time ship, where a bunch of other DC characters are waiting, including Wally West, the Arrowverse version of Wally West, Joe West's son, and Felicity, another absentee. So the Ray and Wally are brought into this, and Felicity's already on hand, and they've been... So now they're summoned, and the Monitor is present, and he's, as usual, he's parceling out little tasks for people to do. And Felicity is already suspecting that there's something the Monitor is withholding from her, and she tells her as much. And the Monitor tells them about Pariah, and how he has information at his disposal that even he is not. Even he doesn't fully understand his role in this great cosmic drama that's unfolding, and I'm not sure that even now I understand what the TV version of Pariah was, what role he actually had in all this. And in the middle of this, Ray is making the rounds and introducing himself to people. And here's another character that didn't make it into the TV crossover, Nissa Al Ghul, who had been a supporting character on Arrow for a time. So she and Arrow shake hands and meet, while the Monitor continues his spiel and tells them that just as the Anti-Monitor is the antimatter doppelganger of himself, the Anti-Monitor has created an antimatter pariah, whom he calls Outcast with a K. Hey-ya. And Tom Grummett got to design the costume for Outcast himself, and he decided that he needed goggles and a little half cowl. And his color scheme is kind of a bluish instead of a greenish. So anyway, the Monitor tells the heroes that they need to track this Outcast person down because I don't know how the Monitor arrives at this conclusion, but he supposedly has the information about who the Paragons are, and that's why the heroes need to track him down. But then Felicity's curiosity gets the better of her, and she hacks into the Monitor's computers, which I don't care how good she's supposed to be at what she does. I don't really buy that she can hack into advanced alien technology in 15 seconds. And that's how she learns that Ollie has died, saving lives on Earth 38 in the first episode. And she is really pissed, A, that this has happened, and B, that the Monitor knew about it and declined to tell her. And she stalks out of that little meeting. Monitor urges her again, find Outcast, learn the names of the Paragon. She replies, bleep you, and stalks out of the room. She has a heart-to-heart with Lila Harbinger, who is, a part of the Arrowverse cast. She's Diggle's wife. So they know each other. They comfort each other briefly. They track down Outcast. He's there on Earth 76. As in 1976, as in the live-action Wonder Woman Linda Carter show. Mm-hmm. And she's there, she's running around, she does her little spin around and change into costume thing, and she tries to save a bunch of kids on a mattress, but the antimatter wave catches up with her, and she and the kids all die, and Linda Carter doesn't even get any dialogue. Just doesn't seem fair. But we're supposed to be focusing our attention on a duel between Pariah and Anti-Pariah. And I just find myself wondering, why does Anti-Monitor even need an Anti-Pariah? What is this Outcast person supposed to... What's his raison d'etre? And he's dueling with his evenly matched positive matter analog, Nash Wells. And you got to wonder, do they meet each other every time a universe dies? Outcast wasn't on Earth N52 when it died at the beginning of this story. It's like, how often do they meet? And do they duel every time? And it's just... The character's just kind of random, was my point. So they try to battle him. Nissa shoots him with an arrow. It doesn't really do much damage. And they're about to die with Earth 76, but Harbinger shows up and pulls all their fat out of the fire. Felicity has a talk with Barry about how she's hoping that, if they're going to save the multiverse, if the Paragons can spark the multiverse and bring it back from the brink of destruction, maybe she can bring Ollie back too. So there's her main motivation. The whole story is really told as much as possible through her point of view. She's the narrator. She's the BOV character. And it's through the lens of her grief and her nigh demonic determination to bring Ollie back to do whatever she has to do, to just trip between universes, lie, cheat, and steal, just to bring the father of her child back from the dead. And she confides this in Barry, and she's just such a good hacker that somehow with her little handheld iPad device, she's able to determine, bing, that Outcast is going to show up on Earth D next. And that's where they all go. And for lovers of the Legends of the DC Universe Crisis special that Wolfman wrote back near the end of the 90s, this is the extra DC Comics parallel Earth that Wolfman introduced in that story, Earth D for Diversity, where the well-known DC Comics heroes are a greater range of genders and ethnicities and what have you. Black Superman, Asian Flash, etc. And so those versions of the heroes are present, and some of the Arrowverse heroes who went along here, the Ray teams up with Earth D's Green Lantern, for example. And this is apparently Felicity's first exposure to Green Lanterns, because she mentions in a little caption that there's a green guy she's never seen before. And Wally West is along, and there's a moment when it looks like Barry is indeed going to snuff it, as is the destiny of Flashes to die in crisis events, because Outcast is up on top of a building commanding hordes of shadow demons to destroy Moscow. But Wally jumps in the way of that antimatter blast, and he dies. So a Flash dies, a kid Flash dies instead of a full-fledged Flash. And that, I guess, is their little explanation for why Wally was not a part of the TV Crisis crossover. So Barry barely gets a chance to mourn his, I don't even know how you describe it. It's more like foster brother than nephew in the Arrowverse version of things.
Right.
He's the son of Detective Joe West, who was Barry's foster father. And the brother to Iris instead of nephew to Iris. But anyway, Barry knocks Outcast out. Pariah sucks his energy right out of him. And then they're able to transport Outcast to a special antimatter holding cell aboard the Monitor's satellite. And I don't know that we've seen a Monitor's satellite in this version of the Crisis, in the Arrowverse Crisis so far. But that's where they take him. And that's where they learn that Outcast, twist, never knew anything about the Paragons. But he is a living antimatter bomb, and he's going to destroy the heroes and their entire universe, whichever universe they're in right now. It's actually not very clear. And that's kind of a cliffhanger. So yeah, why don't we, if you have any notes about any of this, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go too deep into them because you could really go super, super, super deep.
Yeah, and we're trying not to do that here in hour 3 of this episode.
Right. I think the biggest takeaway was in Guggenheim's introduction, where he said, okay, when it came time to do the Crisis, we were in the middle of coordinating a 5-hour story that incorporated the cast of 6 different television shows. Because of the nature of network production, each hour of the 5-part event had to be written simultaneously. And he goes on to say, because of the lead time required, they didn't have the luxury of finalizing what was going on in the live action teleplays versus what they were doing to script these stories. So because as I was reading it, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why this doesn't fit here? Why do we have that? As you mentioned, some characters we see. We did get a mention in the Crisis live action series that there was a thing called the Book of Oa or whatever Monitor mentioned. And I was like, what is that about? And that Felicity was going to go after it. I think it was in chapter 2 or 3.
Yeah, makes sense. This whole story is supposed to happen somewhere in chapter 2, and the Luthor story as well.
Right. So, that's kind of cool and that's kind of fun, but for what they were trying to do for this story, just to have a tie-in, a comic book tie-in to the CW live action show makes sense. I do like that. Well, first of all, I think translating the Crisis to live action and then back to comics again means that they need Derenick and Grummett need to play with the designs of the TV show. Mm-hmm. And I think they do that actually really well. They could have just said, let me make the antimatter wall like Perez did. Let me do Pariah's costume like Perez, But because one begat the other, they're like, no, this is still very much modeled after the CW stuff. So I kind of appreciated that.
Me too.
Yeah. And I do like the alternate Earths that they did do the Fleischer Superman. Amazing. That they did Wonder Woman, because could they have done that in the live action? Probably. Did they probably just run out of time? Yes, or money. And we're going to see later ones that I was actually quite excited about. And in the comics, they can do more. Like, it's not just Ray on Earth X. It's Black Condor. It's Phantom Lady. Like, when I got to that part, I was like, boy, Adam probably loves that. It's all the freedom fighters,
Yeah, I'm glad they showed up on panel briefly. I wish there were Uncle Sam. They at least mentioned him.
And I don't know if I haven't seen the Ray cartoon. I don't know if we got any of those characters in that or not. Yeah,
I've been meaning for years to do. It was on the CW Seed, whatever that actually is. But yeah, that was something I've been meaning to watch and never did.
Felicity's not exactly my favorite character, so her being the point person to this story, while it makes sense, and her dialogue is fairly spot on to the actress who plays her. I was like, okay, I understand it. And I was surprised that they showed Earth D. Okay, great. That must have been Wolfman's. He was like,
without a doubt.
Yeah. And probably the biggest takeaway is this Outcast, is this Pariah alternate version. And you mentioned, why does Anti-Monitor need a Pariah? And then I thought about how Donna Troy or Dark Angel later weren't they trying to twist her into a dark version of Harbinger at some point?
Anti-Harbinger, exactly.
Yeah.
It's found in the just as the Harbinger we know was rescued from water by the Monitor. The Earth 7, I think it was, Donna Troy, was rescued from a burning building by the Anti-Monitor and then made his Dark Angel. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So he had his Anti-Harbinger, although we never saw her in the original Crisis, obviously.
No. Right.
But what would an anti-pariah even be, or what would his function be?
Yeah. And there's an interesting parallel you could make there if Monitor has an anti-Monitor, and if there are parallels in all of these scientists trying to discover the universe, like it's something interesting, like, or maybe Pariah's counterpart is Krona, on some level. You could make that argument if you want. You could headcanon that in a certain way, So I found the stories, comic book versions of live TV shows are sometimes very hit and miss. There's sometimes something missing, right? They because it's either based on a teleplay or a script, it doesn't quite flow like a comic book does. I think the Luthor Superman story flows better than this story.
I agree.
Yeah.
It helps that it's shorter too.
That's true too. So while it was fun to see all of this, and we could like I said, we certainly could go deep. It became just about, I want to collect these books because I'm a Crisis nerd, and they're fine. That's really all I have to say. But there's some stuff about the second chapter that I do like.
Yeah. So we can get back into that. So yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so Pariah is an antimatter bomb. Outcast, the anti-Pariah, is an antimatter bomb. He knows nothing about the Paragons. He just wants to kill everybody. So he blows up the Monitor's satellite that existed suddenly, and now it doesn't exist anymore. And whatever universe it was in doesn't either. But the heroes all escape once again. Lila Harbinger saves them all and takes them back to the Wave Rider, which has been the Monitor's actual HQ for much of this crossover. And Felicity, having discovered that anti-Pariah was a bum steer, she needs to find some other way to learn about these darn Paragons. And she mentions to Barry for the second time that her aim is to use the Paragons to bring Ollie back, and Barry acts surprised for the second time. So she does what she does best. She goes to the Arrow bunker on Earth 1 in Star City. She does more computer research, and she presses a series of buttons, and she discovers a parallel Earth where she might know someone who might know someone who might be able to guide them to an answer to this problem. And so here's where the Book of Oa, here's where she somehow learns about it, and she learns where she needs to go to get her hands on it. So Nyssa and the Ray, two other characters who they couldn't squeeze into the TV crossover, they're the ones who come to Earth 1 to find her, and they go on this little side quest with her. They go to Earth 85, as in 1985, the dawn of time, which is full of DC characters who look a lot like the ones who participated in the comic book crisis, but they're fighting the TV version of the Anti-Monitor with his lack of helmet. And so Nyssa, Al Ghul, and the Ray and Felicity jump right into the middle of that battle. But they've come there to treat with the Phantom Stranger, who is present, of course, because he's always wherever he's needed. And he's the one who tells them where they need to go and how to get there. And so he teleports the three heroes to the parallel Earth where they can find the Book of Oa. It's a universe where there is a Green Lantern Corps, to wit, Earth 12, where the Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds is set. And we get those giant, 50-foot tall thrones in a circle where the Guardians of the Universe sit in their long trailing robes, as seen in that movie. And Felicity talks to them, and she kind of mouths off to them and talks down to them and is, abrasive with them, because she's a desperate woman here, and she's never been particularly humble, even on the show, on the Arrow show, when she's not trying to bring the father of her daughter back to life. At one point, one of the female Guardians calls her an arrogant child. I couldn't agree more. And finally, she realizes how far over her head she is. She starts to cry. She actually says, please. So good for you, Felicity, learning a little bit of humility there. But the Guardians are still not inclined to help them until the most liberal of their number, Ganthet, shows up. Of course, it's always Ganthet. Daddy Ganthet shows up to take her part. He plays, Dumbledore, helping Harry Potter in front of the Wizard Gamat or whatever. And he's the one who says, okay, I'm going to help you get what you want. I'll give you access to the Book of Oa where you can learn what you need to, but beware, it comes with a price. And then the Shadow Demons swoop in, because we needed some action at this point in the story. So the Ray grabs Felicity, takes her to safety. He and Nyssa fight off the swarm of Shadow Demons. And the Guardians call in their honor guard of lanterns, Kilowog, Tomar Ray, and Thal Sinestro. Pre the events of the Green Lantern movie, obviously. And they help to fight off the swarm, while Ganthet takes Felicity into the core of the Green Lantern Citadel on Oa. They find the Book of Oa, which, as it turns out, is written on pages of time itself. So it can't be read in the traditional sense. It kind of has to be experienced. And mortal minds often find it difficult to do so with their sanity intact. Plus, complicating things still further, a shadow demon pops out of the middle of it somehow and drags her inside. So she has a mind-bending, time-twisting, psychedelic experience of the Book of Oa. She sees her daughter Mia as an infant, sees her as a full-grown adult. She sees Ollie, she sees all kinds of stuff, past, present, and future, and somewhere along the line, she does catch a couple of snatches of the information about the Paragons that she came for, and she comes out the other side because she's Felicity Smoke and she's more strong-minded than most. She is still sane. Ganthet is there to catch her as she comes out the other side. She's survived the tribulations and temptations of the Book of Oa intact, and she's got the information. And so she goes out, she gathers up Ray and Nyssa, who don't die. So that's unlike Wally West, we don't really get an explanation for why those two characters don't turn up elsewhere in the TV version of the story. She recuperates briefly, has a little, tender moment with Barry, filling him in on a detail or two, and explains that she needs to go away. She nearly has an encounter with the adult Mia, her full-grown daughter, in a hallway of the Wave Rider, and totally ducks her because she doesn't want to risk an encounter with Mia altering the role that Mia is going to play in unfolding events. Instead, she just has one more a meeting with the Monitor where she tells him the 2.5 things she's been able to learn about the Paragons. Now, she knows 2 of the Paragons, and the third is the Bat of the Future, whatever that means. We find out eventually that it's just Kate Kane. And then she runs away to a little cabin in Hopeport on Earth-1, where she holds the infant Mia and tells her the one piece of information she withheld from the Monitor, i.e. that Ollie's spirit is still out there someplace. And he's destined to become the Spectre and save the multiverse. And she's also sent Barry off on his little quest to find a Lazarus pit and resurrect Ollie's body because, at this point, Felicity believes that that's going to be important to Ollie's ultimate role as savior of the multiverse. So we get an explanation for how Barry knew to go and do that. And we also know how those bits of information about the Paragons found their way to the Monitor, so he could tell the assembled characters in the second episode of the crossover.
Right.
So there you go. There's all the Felicity we could want and all the Felicity we were missing in this very Oliver Queen-centric episode. It's really the story. I mean, it is kind of a shame that she was mentioned so often in the TV miniseries, but she never made an appearance. I don't know whether that's because Emily Rickards wasn't able to fit it into her schedule or they didn't feel like paying. I don't know. But anyway, here is Felicity's view of things.
Right. Boy, did I love seeing Earth 85. They call it the dawn of time, so you can't think too hard of where it actually all fits, and but it was nice seeing those versions again, even if it is a different anti-Monitor that they're fighting. And you could say that that's because they already went through one crisis and this is the second time they're going through it, or it's the post-crisis version of the crisis, whatever.
Kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. But just to see those versions again, that's, those are my babies.
Yep. It's fun to invert those into the comic book version of the TV version of the comic book.
Outside of that, other than using the Green Lantern Corps, using Ray, using Nyssa, I mean, none of these things have a lot of weight. Certainly Felicity doesn't have a lot of weight for me. I got to the second chapter and I was like, okay, we're really going through like things that are just. If we talked about the live action CW. Hitting big beats, needing to remember that it's a TV show, needing to remember what episode or what TV show it was in at that point, and maybe if they missed certain targets or goals for us, at least the story made some sort of sense. I felt this one, especially the second chapter, went in places that was like, okay, this is a lot. This is a lot for very little, I think I would have appreciated the scene between her and Monitor at the end if she wasn't written so Felicity-like. If she was written to, I don't know. I don't know what I wanted, but it felt like this was the stereotyped Felicity more than like a Felicity that had more depth to her, Yeah,
it didn't feel like a Felicity who had been affected in any plausible way by what she's just been through.
Yeah. But I did like the whole ending, and she says how she's going to tell little baby Mia that all this is going on, and I was like, oh, well, there you go. There's your pariah. She's just not your pariah. There's your psychopirate who knows everything about whatever, but she's a baby, so it doesn't matter anyway. She's not going to remember. So that ending at least was like, okay, I see where you're going there. But I don't want to come across that I hated these chapters. You know, they were fine for what they were.
Mm-hmm.
They felt very extraneous, especially the Felicity story. Very extraneous. So, and then we get the second story.
Yep, which, as Peter said, flows a bit better than this one.
Yes, it does. Yes, it
has
does.
The advantage of being just shorter and also lighter and more fun.
Right.
Yes, and it too is supposed to take place during the events of episode 2 of the TV crossover, just a little bit after that big summit where the Monitor shares the information about the Paragons that Felicity was able to get in the first comic story we just finished talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the story opens on Earth 1938, not to be confused with Earth 38. This is Earth 1938. Which could be a number of things. Could be just like a variant of Earth 2, or it could be, as I like to think, it could be the Kirk Allen Superman movie serial's Earth. It does, but we don't really see the Superman of this world. We see the Luthor of this world trying to escape prison again. He murders a guard using a mechanical hornet, and then another guard who is friends with that guard zaps him with a laser gun, and he disintegrates him. Talk about things that are extraneous. This opening scene didn't really need to happen, but because it doesn't contribute anything to the larger action. But I guess you can't have a Crisis type story without a golden agey variant Luthor playing it. Earth 2 Luthor got fried by Brainiac in the original Crisis, so why don't we do something like that here to open up? But the 1938 Luthor is trying to escape because he got some kind of, what do they call it?
Subneural broadcast.
There you go. Subneural broadcast from some mysterious agency outside his world, and he couldn't resist answering it and going to join whoever sent it. And then we cut to the Wave Rider in orbit around Earth 74 at this point, and the Luthor of Earth 38, played by John Cryer, he's being held captive aboard the Wave Rider. Lila, the Harbinger, is acting as his jailer, when she is suddenly zapped, and in struts another Luthor, very Gene Hackman, like we'll call him the Luthor of Earth 78, and he's there to rescue Luthor of Earth 38. And take him away. And we learn that he's got on the Earth 38 Luthor, John Cryer Luthor, has a little gizmo on him that he lifted from Harbinger that allows him to just kind of skip between parallel universes at will. So that explains how he's able to do that when we see him later on in the TV crossover.
Right.
That's an important little plot point. And they skip on over to a satellite in orbit around Earth 99, which you may remember from episode 2 of this crossover is where the Looney Tunes future Batman, played by Kevin Conroy, who murdered his Earth Superman, lives. So that's kind of an appropriate spot for a council of Luthors to hang out. And there's a whole room full of variant Luthors, and we could footnote this, but I don't know if we want to take the time to.
Did you say Looney Tunes?
I did say Looney Tunes, yes, as in insane.
Okay, great. Okay.
Not Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. No, just crazy is what I mean.
Got it.
Mentally unhinged, and he killed the Superman of Earth 99.
Right.
So this is an Earth that no longer has a Superman, and so understandable why the Luthors would find that appealing as a hideout. And so Earth 38 Luthor comes among his inter-universal brethren, and he's the one who has to tell them, hate to tell you this, but all your little plans may be moot soon because there's a wave of antimatter destroying universes. There's this giant anti-monitor person that we need to deal with, so I'm not really interested in joining with you, and you're all kind of inferior to me anyway. Because it's kind of like the Council of Ricks on Rick and Morty. You know, the main Rick that the show is mostly about is the Rickest Rick. He's the most Rick of all Ricks. And we're supposed to believe, for the purposes of this story, that Earth 38 Luthor is the most Luthor. And he's the one who turns Maverick, uses his little gewgaw to just excuse himself from this meeting and go about other business. And he jumps straight to, and this is a continuity glitch that Mark Guggenheim cops to in his little essay at the start of this trade. He goes to Earth 38, which by this point had already been destroyed. It was destroyed at the beginning, or at the end, I mean, of episode 1 of the TV crossover. So Luthor shouldn't be able to go there. But he does anyway, and he finds Superman, his Superman of Earth 38, Tyler Hoechlin, Superman, there. And Well, the two of them nearly go to fisticuffs. Luthor was going to ask for his help, I think, but then one of the Council of Luthor shows up and drags him away and entangles Earth 38 Superman in a little mechanical gimmick. And Superman tries to fly from the fortress to see where the Luthors have gotten to, but he's intercepted by a bunch of members of the Council of Supermen. Many of whom are just like red kryptonite, weird transformations of Superman, but there's also Kingdom Come Superman and Beppo the Super Monkey, something that looks like a Bizarro, etc. And then I guess that's where the first chapter ends. And then the second chapter begins again with the Council of Superman. And that's where it's explained to Earth 38 Superman that this was never your Fortress of Solitude. You accidentally found your way to this other Earth that we're on, Earth 80 something, I think. It's Earth 86.
86.
As in John Byrne, as in Man of Steel. Okay, so he talks to these Supermen, and they learn that the Council of Luthors is up to something, so they decide that they're going to just en masse attack Earth 99 and get those Luthors in their headquarters. But they discover on attacking them that they've put together some kryptonite-powered war suits, just like the ones that pre-crisis Earth 1 Luthor used to wear, the green and purple ones. And they zap the Superman. One panel that I particularly like in this fight sequence is that there's a Superman who looks like, maybe it's the Earth F Superman, perhaps, or like just an early Golden Age Superman with a black and red Superman. And he is able to hold up his hand and just block effortlessly a blast of kryptonite radiation because a Superman from that long ago predates the existence of kryptonite. It hadn't been created yet in the comics. So naturally, he would be immune to it. Yes. And of course, there's the whole issue of, only kryptonite from a given Superman's native Krypton should affect him. Like kryptonite from Krypton 2 shouldn't affect the Superman of Earth 1 and vice versa. But that's not really brought up in this. It's just kind of a big, fun free-for-all that Tom Grummett probably had fun drawing of a bunch of Luthors fighting a bunch of Supermen. And sure enough, the Earth 38 Luthor, Ever the Maverick, decides to team up with his Superman to cut off the power source for all these kryptonite lasers that are being fired around. So that puts an end to this counterproductive battle between Luthors and Superman right quick. The Luthors all fly away. I don't think any of them are killed. None of them are taken captive. So there's a parting of the ways, and Luthor agrees of Earth 38, that is, agrees to go back to captivity aboard the Wave Rider. It's as if he was never gone. But a couple of things he's gotten out of this little side adventure are he got the little teleportation gimmick that lets him go between universes, and he got the nifty idea from his council of counterparts there to travel throughout parallel universes before they all cease to exist and kill as many Supermen as he can.
Yeah.
So that's where he got that idea, and that's why he's doing that the next time we see him in the TV crossover. And that's how he's able to do it, because he's got the teleportation doodad that lets him do it.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the fun of this is, first of all, Tom Grummett, so stellar,
Love him.
Yeah.
Love his art.
It looks comfortable. It flows well. And the footnotey aspects of both the Council of Luthors and Council of Superman are so great. I'm still trying to figure out if one of the Luthors is the Smallville Luthor, maybe the one in the black T-shirt. I don't know.
I thought that was probably Connell, Connor Kent. Genetically, he is half Luthor after all.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so great. Like, they even got the Byrne Luthor in there. They got the quote unquote son of Luthor, the Australian son
with the red chin beard.
Yeah. They do have the Earth 2. I'm assuming it's the Earth 2 Alexander, the one with the red hair.
Yeah.
So I love the Super Friends one, or you could even say the Bronze Age Superman Luthor with the purple suit.
Yes, with the flared collar.
Yeah.
And they even like the tangent Earth version of Superman, who is loosely based on the original villainous concept of Superman that Siegel and Schuster came up with, which then inspired the Ultra-Humanite, which then inspired Luthor.
Right.
Yeah, so he was called Harvey Dent, just to confuse things further in the tangent universe. Yeah,
so great. Like, I really dug all that. Of course, The one Superman that I was trying to figure out, the one down at the bottom of that page. So, like, we see, as you mentioned, Kingdom Come Superman, early Golden Age Superman, or maybe even Reign of the Superman, the black suited Superman from Death of Superman. Mm-hmm. But the one down below, is that supposed to be Dean Cain, do you think? Or Kirk Allen? Or I don't think it's Kirk Allen.
I was about to guess George Reeves.
George Reeves?
It's some live action Superman or other.
Yeah, I got that feeling. So I think those were the fun parts to this story. Letting them go wild and say, hey, go ahead and, show us what you got. And also to the point of, okay, this is what we have to happen with our Luthor so that we can get him to a place where he needs to be. I do love the Gene Hackman Luthor one. I was like, yes, thank you for the Gene Hackman one. Yeah, just this one wasn't, like you said, it was lighter in tone. Not as many characters, not as many concepts. Like the Felicity one, I just felt had to do way a lot. Whether it wanted to show a lot or tell a lot, This one was just like, let's just make it simple. They didn't really show a lot of Luthors. They showed some Superman, but they didn't really show a lot of Luthors in the live action. So here's a chance to do that. Oh yeah, I wonder if the Dean Cain Luthor version, the Lois and Clark Luthor is in it, the one with hair. Not the one that we see with hair, but the other one with hair from the 90s show.
I never watched that show. I didn't even know that there was a Luthor in that reality.
Yeah. So fun, a lot of fun. I quite enjoyed that story.
Me too. And again, Tom Grummett art is very good reason to love this.
Yeah. So that's it, right?
There's your Arrowverse crisis coverage here, folks. It's a nice little digression from our usual comic book talk, and good little intermission as we gear up to start talking about the second half of that maxi series.
Yeah. If you don't have that Paragons Rising hardcover, there are a lot of behind the scenes stuff, costume designs from the live action shows, script things. Marv Wolfman writes a little, text piece, which covers a lot of the same bases that he's covered in other text pieces, but it's kind of nice for him to reflect back on the lineage of Crisis after all those many years, and that it did find its way to a TV version. Greg Berlanti's text piece it didn't have like a lot of information, but it was fine. So, but it's a nice package. You get a lot of, if you liked the CW live action TV show and didn't know that this existed, it's just one more. It's like DVD extras almost.
Yeah, definitely.
Whew. Well, that's our little interlude, like you said. Yeah.
Yep. And it took us just our average length of about 3 hours.
Well, we'll see after I edit. We'll see how much. Sometimes I cut out some of my rambling thoughts. Clean us up a little bit there. Yeah, so whenever we do come back, that means we start on issue 7. Ooh.
That's when things start to get really real.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot from the cover to
the cover,
the origin stories. It's a double-page issue. We never like to predict how many episodes it's going to take per chapter, but I can see that one going at least 3.
At least, yeah.
So that'll be interesting. So, and I guess if we follow our format, like again, we don't have a regular schedule, as listeners know, but we would do issues 7 and 8, and then that would be another break, because we're going every 4 issues.
And we're going to start having to cover the crossovers too.
Well, that's what I mean. We did that after issue 4, where we took a look at all the crossovers up to issue 4. So that means we're going to have to do the same for all the issues going up to issue 8, which there are quite a lot more of.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, how like the Crisis it's not only divided up into 4 issues, 4 issues, and 4 issues, but also 2 issues and 2 issues and 2 issues and 2 issues. So, we took a break between 6 and 7, but we'll definitely take a break also between 8 and 9. But that is, that we'll worry about that when we get it. We got to get through issue 7. What's your feeling on, let's sooner rather than later? What are you thinking? I know you got some busy stuff coming up.
Yeah. I'm thinking we'll probably revisit the issue sometime after Christmas.
Okay. All right. So we'll mark that. That's good because we're in October now, so it's actually not that far away.
Yeah.
And we'll listeners, we will make a concerted effort to get back to it, because who knows? I don't want to be 80 and still doing this.
Yeah, we don't have the benefit of a wave rider here to help us.
Yeah, exactly. No, I like that. Post Christmas, we'll do that. We'll Adam and I will email each other. I'm sure we'll see each other before then, but we'll email and say, okay, what are we going to do? And then we'll come back sooner rather than later. We'll try not to do another year break or anything like that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, go into the home stretch. All right. You can email me at peter@comicgeekspeak.com. I believe your Comic Geek Speak is still up, yes?
I'm still murd at comicgeekspeak.com.
And there's also the comicgeekspeak@gmail.com email. So if you have any reactions to the Crisis TV show, please let us know. If you have any reactions to issue number 7, if you want to jump on that gun, go.
Yep. Any angles you'd like us to pursue, any questions you'd like to see answered, we'll entertain those gladly.
Yeah, that'll be great. All right, Adam, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you too, Peter. This was a great idea. A little palate cleanser before we begin the second half of our years-long project.
Yeah, can't wait. All right, sir. Have a good night.
You too, Peter.